Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Like a wastrel found dead by the side of the road, the Lord Commander was laid out and stiffening on a bare trestle table, naked but for the flimsy cloth, preserving his modesty and caked in his own blood and dirt. To those who did not know him, only the Valyrian steel longsword laid next to the body offered a clue as to Jon Snow's true status. It was his face that caught Ser Davos's eye. Slack and colorless, the blood long drained through the gaping wounds in his upper body. Not even the light of the flickering braziers could soften the harsh gray tones of death's pallor. Only the arrival of Lady Melisandre induced him to tear his gaze away from the horror before him. As she opened the door, a cold gust of snowy wind blew inside, carrying with it the distant sound of a howling wolf. A mournful wail that made his skin prickle with apprehension. It wasn't Jon's wolf either, ghostly sleeping by his dead master's side with not even a twitch of his tail to betray any sign of life. For one cold moment, Ser Davos feared the beast had curled up, died as a show of solidarity to his slain master. Meanwhile, the Red Woman remained silent as she set about her task, causing the atmosphere in the room to thicken. She wrung out a wet cloth, the droplets catching the light as they splashed back into an earthenware bowl. Unhurriedly, she propped Longclaw against the table, then washed the dirt and blood from the dead man's chest. Slowly, almost lovingly, she cleansed Jon's body. Only when he was thoroughly clean did she begin her incantations. A foreign tongue he did not understand, spoken in an undulating whisper, barely audible. Her movements were perfunctory now, as if even she didn't think this was going to work. She snipped at his wet hair, speaking her incantations to Roxlear, before dropping the cuttings into the brazier at Jon Snow's head. More cuttings than even a few beard trimmings. All were fed to the flames, filling the air with an acrid stench. All the while, her incantations grew louder, stronger as she seemed to hit her stride. She placed her hands on the wounds and spoke as if pleading with them to close. She repeated the process over every one, until she reached the spot on his motionless chest where his heartbeat should have been. There she paused. The men lining the shadows shifted as the tension grew. But Melisandre would not be hurried. She pressed down on his heart, voiced her final incantation, and gave a sharp push at Jon's chest. Ser Davos dared to step closer to see if there was any change, any viable sign of life from the Lord Commander. Holding his breath, he watched and waited for what seemed an age and a day. The confidence the lady had gathered throughout the duration of the ritual melted away as she looked down at the still dead man, hopeless and empty. She was the first to walk away, closely followed by Daenerys and Tormund Giantsbane. Their last hope faded with the smell of the burning hair. Anger and frustration vied against each other among Davos' feelings, quickly giving way to bitter disappointment. As some final empty show of respect, he placed Longclaw back at Jon's side, closing his cold, stiff hand over the hilt and headed for the door himself. Just then, a sharp, loud gasp sounded as he reached the threshold. He whipped around again to where the Lord Commander lay struggling for air. On the turn of a hair, hope surged within him once more. "He's back," he called out to the others who'd already retreated. "Get back in here now," he's breathing. Despite being the first out the door, Melisandre was also the first one back in the room. She shoved past Davos and almost fell on the Lord Commander, smoothing his brow as she studied his face intently. Slowly his breathing evened out and he appeared to be in a deep sleep. Melisandre shook her head slowly, as if this were a negative thing. Davos was puzzled. I'm not an educated man, my lady, but he's definitely breathing." It worked. "He should be awake," she pointed out. Looking up at Ser Davos, she grew more urgent as she added, "This shouldn't be happening. Why isn't he waking?" "What are you asking me for?" Davos thought irritably. Still, he hazarded a guess. "He's injured. He needs to sleep and heal." "Here," said Dolorous Ed, appearing before them with a bucket of cold water. Melisandre had used to wash the body. "I'll wake him up." Ed's voice sounded so distant, so far away, like he was calling to him from the opposite end of a long tunnel. Unable to make out what was said, it contrasted sharply with the shock of the freezing cold that suddenly engulfed his whole body. Groaning, he tried to call out, but his limbs were so stiff and sore that all he could do was roll over. When he settled himself again, the warmth returned. Jon had been so long in the far north, he had almost forgotten what the sun on his face felt like. Warm and soft as a mother's embrace was what it felt like. Had he not also felt like he drank a wine sink dry the night before, he might have enjoyed the sensation more. Reluctantly, he opened his eyes but then winced painfully and screwed them shut again. Too bright. Much too bright. As the burning in his eyes subsided, he rolled over onto his side and breathed in the rich scent of earth and grass. They stabbed me, he remembered. It was a memory that dropped back into his conscious mind like a stone down a dry well. They stabbed me. Tried to kill me. Ignoring the aches and pains that filled his body, he sat up and forced himself to get his bearings back. Seriously, Lyanna had been the ringleader, with Bowen Marsh and Ollie. Even Ollie had looked him in the eye and sunk a blade into his heart. For the watch, the refrain of every mutineer rang in his head once more. For the watch, Ed, John gasped, looking all about him. But there was no one there. No Ed, no Tormund, not even Alysir Thorne. The wall was gone, replaced by mountains that stretched out all around him. Above him, a blue sky spread out only to be punctured by mountain peaks, all clear and bright in the throes of an early spring. Barefoot and near naked, he looked down at his own chest and gasped anew at the sight of the open wounds. Not even his apparent nudity detracted from the ruin of his flesh, but he still breathed a small sigh of relief when he saw that his small clothes were intact and in place. Other than that, there was a small cloth covering him, and Longclaw had slipped from his hands as he regained consciousness. The sword lay at his side, sheathed and mercifully undamaged. Had they known I was still alive when they dumped my body in this place? He had no way of knowing, just as he had no idea of how long he had been unconscious for. Long enough, it seemed, to take him far away and abandon him on this lonely mountainside. Realizing that if he stayed here, he would die for certain, he slowly winched himself back to his feet. His indeterminate blackout and the thin mountain air conspired to make his head spin as he took his first tentative steps. Then, making matters worse, the nearest road was treacherous, with loose stones that dug into the soles of his feet. Barely a few steps down the way, and his feet were beginning to bleed. Cursing, he sat back down again and tried to work out where he was. North of the wall? Definitely not. The nighttime cold would have killed him outright, which made him wonder why Thorne and the others didn't just do that. They might even have found the prospect of him becoming a wight mildly amusing, but no, not even they were stupid enough to risk that. With a sinking heart, he realized he could have been unconscious for weeks, and he could be anywhere in Westeros. What now? He thought to himself. Assuming the Boltons wouldn't exactly welcome him with open arms, Winterfell was out of the question. Mance was dead, so there was no point heading north of the wall. If he did find his way to Castle Black, then Alysir Thorne, Bowen Marsh, and Ollie would be only too willing to do the job properly this time. Then it came to him in a flash, and gave chase to his gathering despair. Sam! His old friend's name even tasted sweet on his lips as he spoke it aloud. Even though he was undoubtedly many leagues from Old Town, just having somewhere to aim for renewed his sense of direction and gave him something to focus on. Get off the mountain, go to the nearest town, and get help. A plan began to formulate. He could just say he was attacked by brigands to explain his injuries. There was bound to be a charitable septon who would take pity on him, even a master if he was really lucky. First, he had to get there. Standing again, he wrapped the loincloth around his hips, where it hung to mid-thigh, easily preserving his modesty and a little dignity. Fixing it in place with his sword belt, he began cautiously treading around the loose rocks again, heading downhill. Progress was slow and slowed further as the sun began to set, and he cut his feet again. This far in, he had neither seen nor heard another living soul. It felt like he was the last person alive in the whole country. But when the sound of voices did reach him, it brought no relief. Fearing real brigands, he shrank to side of the mountain road, feeling horribly exposed. However, for all he knew, the people coming up behind him may be friendly. Torn between hiding and making himself as visible as possible, the snap decision made itself. The only item of value he had was Longclaw, so he tossed it into a nearby thicket of bushes to hide it. With literally nothing else to lose but his life, he positioned himself in the middle of the tracks. As the strangers drew closer, he also heard the sound of horses' hooves crunching against the stony road. He looked back in the direction from which they approached, holding his breath, as a young woman rounded a bend. A maid. Relief washed over him. A maid would be no threat to him. When the lady saw him, she yanked on the reins of her horse in alarm. Immediately their gaze locked into each other's, and she gaped openly at him. "Ned?" she gasped. "Gods, Ned, what happened? I thought you were back with the others?" She soothed her mount before jumping from the saddle. Assuming Ned was her companion, Jon tried calling out to her. "Please don't be alarmed. I am unarmed. I was set upon by robbers." "Ned, it's going to be all right," she called back to him. She was running towards him when she stopped and called out to someone else. "Bran, it's Ned. He's been attacked." "Listen, I'm not Ned," he tried calling over, but she wasn't listening. "But please, madam, I badly need your help." The girl was running again, skirts hitched above her ankles. Only when she was a few feet away did she come crashing to a halt. Her mouth fell open and her eyes widened in alarm. A faint flush of embarrassment crept over her face. "Oh my, you're not Ned at all, are you?" Then her eyes raked over his battered and wounded chest, horror returning to her features in a heartbeat. But she didn't let her fear or shock overawe her for long. She pulled the cloak off her back and threw it around his shoulders. "Who did this? Where are they now?" "My brother is nearby, and we will have these men caught and punished. In the meantime, we'll look after you. Have no fear." "I can't remember anything," he stammered, huddling inside her cloak. It was fur-lined and felt luxurious against his bare, cold skin. "All I remember is throwing my sword into those bushes so they wouldn't be able to steal it." The lie came easily, and she even went to retrieve Longclaw for him. By the time she did that, her companion had caught them up and was now dismounting his huge Destrier warhorse. He was tall and rugged-looking, and, to his near-giddy relief, they both had the sigil of House Stark embroidered into their outer garments. He was about to tell them who he was when the man cut him off. "Gods, Lyanna, I know we don't see much of Ned since he came to the Eyrie, but really? That's quite some mistake to make there." He grinned as he spoke to the girl, but he was looking at Jon. "Actually, you do look an awful lot like our Ned." "Shut up, you!" The girl hissed back. Now is not the time for teasing. "So, let's see what they did to you." The man motioned for him to open the cloak he was wrapped in, which he hesitantly did. The other man's eyes widened in shock at the state of it. The wounds were a vivid, weeping red against deathly pale skin. "Seven hells, man! The old gods and the new are smiling down on you, by the looks of it. You ought to be dead." Clearly, he did not notice Jon paling or his heartbeat racing as he looked between the girl and him. His mouth had run dry and his whole body was trembling. Something they took for the after effects of his attack. In reality, it was his own mind that was taking the beating now. Forgive me, my lord, but what did you say your names were?" The man jolted as he studied the wounds. "My apologies, friend. I am Brandon of House Stark, and this here is my sister, Lady Lyanna." He nodded to the young maid who was behind Jon now, studying Longclaw where it had been thrown into the bushes. She glanced up again and gave him a wave as he turned to get her back in his line of vision. They were both dark-haired, gray-eyed, and lean, the hallmark of every generation of Starks since Bran the Builder. Jon could feel his breathing grow ragged as realization finally began sinking in, but he could not fathom it. His own mind could not take in the enormity of what seemed to be happening to him. None of it was possible. "No," he murmured beneath his breath. "No, it cannot be." The ground seemed to pitch beneath his feet. Meanwhile, a larger party was fast approaching. Brandon and Lyanna had clearly ridden out ahead of the others, stretching their horses' legs. Now the others had caught them up and two more young men came cantering around the bend in the mountain road. The growing audience helped Jon's racing nerves not in the slightest. "What's all this about me being attacked?" the one on the left asked. Jon's hammering heart suddenly felt as if it had stopped altogether. Luckily, Brandon had taken to holding him up. Otherwise, he'd have fallen in a dead faint long ago. All the same, he was capable of doing nothing more than gape dumbly at all these long-dead people who surrounded him. Was he dead too, and just didn't realize it? Was this the afterlife? But it was happening. It was all real and solid and alive. "Never mind that, Ned. This is serious. Ride back to the others and get Lord Aaron's master," said Brandon. Urgently, he added, "Now, this lad's life is in danger." Jon watched as his father and Lord Robert Baratheon turned their horses around and rode back the way they came. It tore his heart in two to see Eddard Stark looking at him without so much as a trace of recognition in his eyes. Meanwhile, Lyanna was trying out Jon's sword. "Small wonder you risked your neck to save this blade," she said. "Look, Bran, it's Valyrian steel." Curiosity clearly piqued. Brandon let go of Jon's shoulders to go look at Longclaw. Immediately, Jon fell back down again, impacting painfully with the hard ground. "Brain, you fool," Lyanna cursed, running back to Jon's side. "Are you all right? Just lie still until help arrives. I'm sorry to say it, but I don't think the finest maesters in all the realm will have you fit and strong again in time for old Wentz Tourney." Jon's head continued to reel, but he was powerless to move or even speak coherently. "But I can't. Don't fret on it," said Brandon. "We'll find you some clothes that fit, and you can come with us. My sister's a spectator, too. You can watch with her, if you're alone. In the meantime, you still have this magnificent blade. That's a wolf on the pommel, isn't it?" Lyanna beamed down at him. "We love wolves." In that moment, Jon decided that none of this was happening. Shaking off Lyanna's arms, he staggered back to his feet and attempted walking. But all that happened was that he lurched forward, almost vomited, and fell into a cold black faint. Melisandre's red eyes glowed by the light of her fires, an effect made all the more sinister when viewed from the shadowy corners of the old maester's chambers, as Ser Davos did. Ed and Tormund had carried Jon Snow's comatose body there earlier in the day, laying him down in Aemon's old bed. Covered in furs to keep him warm, he lay there still, motionless and mostly silent. But there was no denying the heartbeat that pulsed beneath Davos's fingers whenever he checked, strong and steady, never faltering. Jon Snow was undeniably alive. Meanwhile, the Red Woman squinted intently into the flames, reading whatever it was she saw in the brazier. Davos had tried himself, but all he could make out were the tongues of flame lapping at the wood and coals. The heat had driven him back after no more than 2 minutes, and his beard had been singed in the process. So much for that. Having decided to leave it to the priestess, he watched her every move and studied her expression as she went about her strange arts. Every so often, she spoke in a foreign language. Valyrian? Davos could not tell, for he himself had only the common tongue despite all his travels. He could ask which way to the market in Dothraki, and he knew the pleasantries in low Valyrian. None of it, he thought, would be of much interest to the Lord of Light. "Is there anything there?" he asked, when the wait became too much. Melisandre did not reply immediately, nor even divert her squinting gaze away from the fire. Ever since Stannis' defeat, she had been disillusioned, but now she looked like she was fighting some internal conflict brought by the flames themselves. Eventually, she turned to him with a frown marring her pale face. "I ask, but Rosier shows me only the mountains far away," she replied. Then Winterfell, a door leading deep into a dark vault, deeper and deeper to a place I dare not go. "The Red Mountains of Dorne?" he asked. Without waiting for a reply, he added, "But is Jon Snow in any of them?" She responded with a slow shake of her head. "Only a blue rose growing from a crack in the stones, a scarlet dragon drowning in a rushing river." Occasionally, Davos reminded himself that this was the same woman who thought Stannis was the reincarnation of a character from the Age of Heroes, and thought sailing to the Blackwater months earlier than planned was a good idea. Just then, Jon murmured in his sleep, a moan escaping his parted lips as his hand clenched into a fist. Both of them rushed back to his side, willing him to wake up. Both holding their breath, they looked down at him and watched as he once more relaxed, slipping farther away from them. Davos sighed heavily. "Do you think he can hear us? Would it help if we talked to him?" I don't know," replied Melisandre, falteringly. Self-doubt was creeping up on her. "Anything's worth a try," he conceded. He then leaned closer to Jon's face, which was once more slack with sleep. Suddenly, Davos felt like he'd lost his tongue as he grasped at meaningful speech. After a moment, he gave up and resorted to shouting his name. Lord Commander, can you hear me?" "You've got to wake up now." "Lord Commander." Sir Davos Jon could only murmur the name as he stirred from his sleep. But just like the day before, the distant voices faded, and the reality that greeted him upon waking was something very different. The shock hit him again, but he only smarted for a moment before pulling himself together. Finding himself wrapped up on a pallet bed inside a pavilion tent, he struggled to sit up properly. When he did, he was able to get a good look at his new surroundings. A brazier burned in the middle, smoke escaping through a small hole in the roof of the silk. A snarling gray dire wolf was embroidered into the panels of silk at his side, and an old maester was bent over a small trestle table, grinding the contents of a pestle and mortar. The sound of the pestle grinding against the bowl of the mortar was the only sound to be heard, until the maester realized he was awake. So startled he was that he almost knocked his work over. "Oh, you're back with us," the man called over to him. "Lady Lyanna will be most relieved." "I didn't mean to startle you," Jon said, extricating his legs from the tangle of sheets. His feet ached as he set them down on the ground, reminding him he'd cut them the day before on the stony mountain road. "Your poultice is nearly ready." The maester was approaching him now, the contents of his mortar now wrapped in a fine cloth. "Just lie down, hold this here, and I will inform the lady and her brothers that you're back in the land of the living." He demonstrated by pressing the poultice against a large open wound on his chest. To his surprise, the others had all been stitched up. "Oh yes, I patched you up while you were unconscious. I'll see to this one later," the master explained. He drew a sharp breath as the poultice was pressed into the wound, causing a sharp sting that soon settled into a not unpleasant warmth. Thanking the man, Jon watched as he vanished through the opening of the pavilion, leaving him alone in there. He could have sworn he slept only for a night, but by the feel of the ground they were well away from any mountain range now. Surely it would have taken weeks to get down from the mountains of the moon, which is where he thought he was. As soon as he pondered that dilemma, another sprang into his mind. Why? Why was he here? Of all places, he didn't feel dead. Whatever dead felt like. Then there were the voices of his friends. Back at Castle Black, he heard them talking about him. The exotic accent of the Red Woman, gruff Sir Davos, and the droll Dolorous Ed, and the sonorous boom of Tormund Giant's Bane, sometimes faint. Sometimes it sounded like they were in the room with him. As soon as he woke, it was like the daylight snuffed them out and plunged him back into this strange hinterland. It left him torn between fear and bewilderment. He was not alone for long before the flap of the tent was pushed aside once more, letting in a gust of clean, fresh air. Jolted out of his reverie, he looked up to see Lyanna ducking under the entrance, with Brandon, Eddard, and a startlingly young Benjen close behind her. Benjen, just like his father, looked at him as though he were a stranger. There was not so much as a trace of recognition in his eyes. "You're awake," Lyanna beamed as she sat herself at the edge of his bed. "Gods, you've been asleep for days. The whole way down the mountains. You didn't wake up once." Benjen clambered onto the foot of the bed, while Eddard sat at the table the maester had been working at moments before. Brandon, however, seemed restless and never stood still for long. He repeatedly pulled and pushed a dirk on his sword belt, sheathing and unsheathing it rapidly and constantly. Every so often, Eddard noticed and looked like he wanted to slap him for it. Eddard, whom Jon had to consciously stop himself from staring at constantly and longingly. "I am you, son," he yearned to say. "You must remember me, I am your son," but there was no way of saying anything without sounding like a madman. After a long pause, he turned his doleful gaze to his aunt Lyanna. "Thank you for having your maester attend me." "Actually, it was Lord Aaron's maester, but he's ever so good," she pointed out, before introducing him to the rest of her family. "You remember Bran, of course, but this one here's Ned. I thought you were him when I first saw you. Last, here's Benjen. We'll all keep an eye on you until you find your friends again, so don't worry." As Lyanna pointed out his father, Ned blushed and shied away. He really was timid, Jon thought to himself. A sharp contrast to his older brother. "And this is your cue to tell us who you are," Brandon hinted, grinning at him. Jon was suddenly floundered. He couldn't very well say how Stark. They knew he wasn't from any of the other northern houses in their time, and they had already seen his Valyrian steel sword, and couldn't very well pass himself off as a commoner or bastard without raising further serious questions. He could see Longclaw from the corner of his eye, propped against a wooden chair like a piece of incriminating evidence that ought to have been burned ages ago. "My name's Jon," he said, sending up a silent prayer they'd be satisfied with that. The prayer went unanswered. "Jon of House," Brandon prompted while the rest all looked at him expectantly. "Carrying a sword like that, you must be someone we'd know." "Jon of House," he trailed off, color rising in his face as he struggled to pluck a feasible house out of thin air. "House," he repeated, dumbly. Brandon suppressed a laugh. "Jon of House. What's your sigil, then? A house by any chance?" "Bran, leave him alone," Lyanna scolded. "He doesn't have to tell us if he doesn't want to." Inwardly, Jon was kicking himself. "It's fine. The truth is, I'm not of a noble house. I'm the bastard son of Lord Matson, so you wouldn't know me. This is his sword, and I'm just minding it for him until he returns from the Free Cities." "Never heard of them." Lyanna cut Brandon off again, heaving a sigh and rolling her eyes. He did say you wouldn't have heard of them. Obviously, they're a minor house. Now leave all of you. Can't you see he's exhausted? Really, he wanted them all to go so he could be alone and get to grips with what was happening. But as the boys shuffled out of the pavilion like scolded toddlers, Lyanna remained sat on the edge of his bed. She smoothed down her skirts as they went, picking at a loose thread in the gray and white cloak she wore over her shoulders. Every time Jon looked in her eyes, he found himself thinking of awry. When you passed out, up on the mountain road there, we all thought your wounds were festering, she said. But the master said they were fine. Still, he stitched you up properly, just to be safe. Oh, and Ned donated a change of clothes, seeing as your own seemed to have been stolen. Turns out he's exactly your size. Thank you, my lady. I really am grateful, he replied. Oh, please, call me Lay, everyone else does, she said. Jon managed to raise a pained smile, setting the poultice to one side. The wound no longer hurt. None of them did, although they still looked angry and red. All the while he was aware of Lyanna looking at him, her gaze raking over his bare chest before she turned and began fidgeting with the hem of her cloak again. Had he not still been as stunned as a fox in a man-trap, he might have found some way to make polite conversation with her. But just as he was starting to remember his manners, she met his gaze and said, "This is passing strange, Jon. But have we met somewhere before? It's just that I swear I've seen you somewhere, or I know you from somewhere. I can't quite put my finger on it." You died before I was born, he thought to himself as a sadness closed over him. He watched her sitting there, young and beautiful, so full of life and excited about the tourney. By his estimation, she had a year or two left to live. Brandon had left. "I think not, my lady," he replied. "Leia," she laughed and shook her head. When she laughed, her gray eyes shone. "No, I know what it is. It's because you do look so much like Ned. Is your father's house based in the Vale, where we found you? There's a lot of Stark blood among the Vale lords, you see." "Yes," he replied hollowly. "That's what it'll be." She smiled again. "Strange, because I know a northern accent when I hear one. Oh well, never mind. Are you looking forward to the tourney? My betrothed is taking part in the melee, and I promised I'd go and watch. We don't really like that sort of thing, but because it's Robert, well, you know how it is." "Melees are just playing at war," Jon said. "That's what my father always said." "Sounds like your father ought to meet my father," she retorted. "But it's true, isn't it? I still love it, though. And the jousting, I think that's what I'm looking forward to most." She paused, her mouth open as if about to say something, but then thinking better of it, color rose in her face as she added, "Listen to me prattling on when you must be so disappointed about your injuries ruling you out." Jon was keen to reassure her. "No, please, it's fine. I've heard Prince Rhaegar will be attending, though. Do you know him?" Lyanna raised one skeptical eyebrow. "I know I'm Lord Rickard's daughter. Even so, the Crown Prince and I don't exactly mix in the same social circles." In turn, Jon tried to laugh, to make it sound light and unimportant. "It's not that, it's just that I've heard some rumors about him, that he once forced a maiden. It may be an idea to avoid him. They say his father is mad, but I hear only good things about the Crown Prince." Jon hesitated, deciding against laboring the point. Still unsure of where he was or why he was there, he couldn't say for certain whether the worst would happen. Either way, he knew if he saw Rhaegar anywhere near her, he would do all he could do, stop the abduction. He didn't care if Brandon and Eddard thought him mad, he would stop it. He might even stop the war in the process. They could live as a family, even without him, and be happy as they are now. Brandon would marry Catelyn. Lyanna would be loved by Robert for the rest of her days, and Eddard. Thinking of his father made the breath catch in his throat. "Losier," he said, sitting up in bed so he could be nearer to her. "Yes? Forgive me if this is rather forward," he began, "but does Ned have a lady?" Referring to his own father as Ned felt like the height of bad manners, but he had to remember that Lord Stark is not his father. Yet, meanwhile, Lyanna was baffled. "Ned, a woman? Gods. No. You've seen him. He wouldn't say boo to a goose," she laughed. "Ned's such a sweet thing, but he's so shy. I mean, Brandon is a girl in every town, but Ned's so different from him, it's like night and day. If truth be told, I was rather hoping he would meet someone at the tourney." She paused for breath, then winked at him. "Who knows, you might too. I hope you don't," he inwardly thought. Outwardly, however, he forced himself to smile. "I doubt that very much." The following morning, Come dawn, they were on the move again. It turned out that they had made it to Lord Harroway's town before he woke up, and they were on the last stretch of their journey to Harrenhal. Outside, Jon could see that other noble houses were making their way to whence Tourney. Aaron's Roses and Waynwoods were the ones he could make out, but there were scores of others besides. Just for a moment, Jon forgot himself and allowed himself to simply take in the sights and sounds of the legendary event unfolding all around him. Even so, he stuck like glue to the Stark retinue as he mounted a spare horse and reined up beside Lyanna and Benjen. Riding not 4 feet ahead of him, Lyanna glanced back over her shoulder and smiled. "Are you ready?" Jon nodded to her. Of course. With that, she dug her heels into her horse's flanks and broke into an instant trot, rapidly building into a gallop as she sped through the streets as if she and her mount were one. He had heard it as she was half centaur, but not realized how true it was. Poor Benjen turned to him with a look of resigned exasperation on his face. "She's such a show-off." Jon smirked as he choked on his aunt's dust. "Yes, well, you know what to do about that." Benjen shrugged. "You won't catch her up. No one can. Not even Brandon." "Don't bet on it," Jon retorted, digging his spurs into his own horse's flanks. "Come on, Benjen. What are you afraid of? Getting beaten by a girl?" Pricking the boy's pride worked. Soon they were both giving chase, down the winding streets, to the holy terror of the populace. Jon still didn't really know where he was going, or what he'd do when he got there. But for the moment, he savored the clean air and the thrill of the chase as he charged after her. Dead or not, he'd never felt more alive than in that one small moment. Closing his eyes, Bran released his grip on the roots of the weirwood tree. A rush of blood momentarily deafened him as he felt himself being pushed out of the past and dropped back into the present. He took a moment to catch his breath and let his heartbeat even out. Then, moments later, he sat up and smiled at the memory of the visions he and the three-eyed raven explored. Old Nan had been there, only she wasn't old. She was young Nan, and she had run up to a very tall knight and hugged him tightly. The vision was from so long ago, he couldn't even guess at who the other people were, but it was definitely in the north. Winterfell had been in the background. Old memories of his own childhood had been evoked, leaving a trace of the bittersweet lingering even now. After a minute to compose himself, he turned to the three-eyed raven, still embedded in his prison of roots. "Was that Sir Duncan the Tall?" As ever, he got no straight answer. "Your nursemaid has led an eventful life, Brandon." He had expected no less. Just as he had expected no less than for his mentor to slip back into his deep trance within minutes of the lesson being concluded. Brain no longer minded. It was safe inside the weirwood, wide and surprisingly spacious. Occasionally, Leaf joined them and offered guidance. Mostly, it was just him, Mira, and Hodor in there. "Hodor," he addressed the gentle giant, "go and tend to Summer. I need to speak with Mira." "Hodor!" With that, he ambled off and Bran watched as he went. All the while, he could feel Mira fixing him with her gaze. "Are you all right?" she asked. "What else did you see?" "I don't know for sure," he replied, voice low. It was while the vision was transitioning. "I caught a glimpse of a man on a mountainside, naked and injured. He was talking to Aunt Lyanna and our uncle." He paused, studying her expression for a minute. "Mira, it was my brother, Jon." It was fleeting and it was impossible. But Bran had been doing this long enough to know what he had seen. By some miraculous act of serendipity, the Starks managed to find a quiet spot by the God's Eye in which to set up their overnight camp. Not far from their spot, Jon could look in all directions and see nothing but a great tidal wave of people all heading for Harrenhal. Many armored for the martial events and mounted on great destrier horses, seas of banners from noble houses across the Seven Kingdoms fluttered in the soft winds, and the air was alive with sounds and smells of other camps. On the north shore of the lake, Harrenhal itself loomed in the distance. Across the water, the Isle of Faces sat shrouded in mist as the sun began to set. Every so often, Jon stopped what he was doing just to look and take in the view. Back in his own time, what felt a century ago, he had left Winterfell and headed north in the belief he would never see anything like this again. Even before that, he had never left the north. He had never been invited to a grand spectacle, and he had never met his whole family. Sometimes he caught himself thinking that getting stabbed by his own men and being tossed out of his life was actually worth it. He remembered Yekrita then, as she died in his arms. "We should have stayed in that cave, Jon Snow," she had told him. Maybe she was right. Maybe he should stay in the past and hitch himself onto his Uncle Brandon's retinue. Always the train of thought led him back to the same question. Am I really dead? Everyone else around him was dead. Benjen was probably dead. But then he saw Bronze Jan Royce, leading his men through Harroway's town. He was definitely still alive in Jon's old life. He had seen the man himself in Winterfell not 3 years before. Still finding his new circumstances bewildering, he resumed helping to set up the camp and leading their weary horses to the water's edge, just to take his mind off it all. Meanwhile, Lyanna circulated among them handing out cups of ale and honey mead. Are you sure you should be doing that? She asked, handing him a horn of ale. You're still wounded. I'm fine, honestly, he replied, accepting the drink with gratitude. She did not look convinced. Just don't overdo it. You might burst a stitch. Before Jon could reply, Brandon had overheard and came striding over to them from where he had set up a pavilion tent. You're fussing like an old woman, sweet sister. Oh, and mine's a horn of ale, thanks. Lyanna rolled her eyes. Was I even offering anything? Did I even ask? No, but you were going to, because you're such a sweet girl, always thinking of others. He flashed her a grin as she huffed indignantly and returned to the barrels of ale. As soon as her back was turned, Brandon shrugged off his heavy furs and drew his sword. Having already bore witness to his uncle's sudden displays of violence, Jon drew back and felt for the hilt of Longclag. A reaction met with a sudden gale of laughter. Brandon composed himself quickly and clarified his intentions. Swap, he said, holding out the hilt of his blade. Nodding to Longclaw, he added, I'll be gentle with her, I promise. Jon hesitated at the sparring invitation. Longclaw was like an extension of his own arm, and he'd only ever seen Brandon's sword laying across the lap of his effigy down in the crypts. For him it would be like walking with someone else's legs. Still, he handed over Longclaw and exchanged her for Brandon's blade. It was heavy, almost unwieldy at first, with Bran being so much bigger than himself, but after turning the hilt and bouncing it in his palms, he soon found his balance. Meanwhile, opposite him, Brandon was testing Longclaw admiringly. Moments passed, then Brandon began squaring him up. Wise to what was happening, Jon shrank back and made himself small. All the while, he gripped both hands around the hilt of the unfamiliar blade. He wanted Brandon to think him a scared boy, giving himself a few seconds of advantage when he launched the attack, which he did, with such skill that the older, bigger man's eyes widened in shock. Brandon parried the attack just in the nick of time, before lunging in with Longclaw. Jon had already seen that coming and blocked it almost lazily. An easy smile played across his lips as he stepped forwards, confident now and with Brandon's sword balanced casually against his shoulder. Sorry. Did I surprise you, old man? Jon taunted, grinning. His uncle had underestimated him and they both knew it. Careful, my lady. I wouldn't want to ruin that pretty face of yours. Brandon shot back, raising Longclaw again. Jon ducked out of the way, sweeping his sword at Brandon's knees while he aimed for Jon's head. They both lost ground, but recovered swiftly as the sparring intensified. From the corner of his eye, Jon could see an audience of Starks and a stray Baratheon gathering around to watch. Lyanna, it seemed, had forgotten all her worries about his health, and was now cheering her brother on loudly and laughing with her other brothers. Come on, Bran. On the honor of House Stark. Her shrill voice cut through the clash of metal on metal. She was soon joined by Benjen, but Eddard clung close to Robert's side and merely watched them both intently. Meanwhile, Jon blanked them all out and concentrated on his technique. It felt like it had been forever and a day since he had sparred with a partner just as highly trained as himself. And he was relishing the challenge. He blocked, as much as he attacked, but was soon gaining ground, only to then slip up and lose it again. They were evenly matched and equally determined. Only the aching of his wounds was preventing him from going too far, and even that was subdued by the rush of blood through his veins. Eventually it was left to Lyanna to call a draw. She flung herself between the two of them, her arms held out to separate them. The Lady of Winterfell calls a draw, she laughed, dark gray eyes shining. Well fought, both of you. Houses Stark and Mazan are equal in skill. Both breathless and flushed in the face, they shook hands as they reclaimed their rightful weapons. Brandon complimented him on his skill as he returned, Longclaw. Jon couldn't help but notice that Brandon looked at him differently now. He had succeeded in winning the other man's respect. Something that he couldn't help but flush with a small degree of pride over. Later that evening, they dined together in the main pavilion tent, with Brandon bringing him into the circle. In the intervening hours, Robert Baratheon had vanished, only to return bearing a posy of wildflowers, which he presented to Lyanna. Jon watched as she beamed happily, inhaling their rich scent with relish before kissing Robert's cheek. Although still young, the Lord of Storm's End already had a full beard, just as Jon remembered from his royal visit to Winterfell. But here he was young, lean, and handsome. Only now could he see the demon of the trident, the warrior king his father had always talked about. It was clear to see why women went weak at knees for him. Lyanna, however, smiled stiffly, and the gesture didn't quite reach her eyes. As he continued to watch them interact, it seemed to him like she was doing her duty and playing the role of blushing bride-to-be. They've only just met, he reminded himself. Even as that thought flitted through his mind, she extricated herself from Robert's arms a little too quickly, then made herself busy with serving up second helpings of lamb stew to everyone, then topping up goblets with honey mead as though looking to avoid the inevitable return to her eager paramour. Although it seemed off to him, he paid no further heed to it as Robert spoke up again, his voice cutting through the rest of the chatter. "Brandon, what's all this I've been hearing about you, crippling some little shit at River Run?" A peal of laughter came from Lyanna. "Oh yes, Jon won't have heard this either. Tell it again, Brandon. What happened?" Just then, another nugget of realization dropped like a stone into Jon's consciousness. Catelyn Tully of River Run is still to be wed to Brandon, not his father, but he pushed that aside and turned curiously to his uncle, who had choked on a mouthful of mead as he swallowed and laughed at the same time. He reached out and slapped Jon on the back as if he'd been the one spluttering, but took it as a sign that he ought to be paying attention to this one. "Seriously, right? This boy, or whatever he's supposed to be, that lives at River Run with Cat and her sister, he only went and challenged me to a duel," he retorted, glancing between Jon and Robert. "He says to me, Cat's his one true lady love, and that if I'm to take her hand in marriage, it must be over his dead body. I swear it true, he was about 14, if he's a day." Jon suppressed a snort of laughter at the thought of anyone fighting for the hand of his sour-faced former stepmother. But here, she too would be a young maid, full of hope for the future, rather than bitterness for the sins of others. Whoever this poor victim was, Jon couldn't help but feel a little sorry for his humiliation. "So what did you do?" asked Jon, looking up at his uncle wide-eyed. "Surely you didn't kill the boy?" Brandon guffawed. "Nearly. Let's just say he'll have those scars for the rest of his life, from the collarbone to his belly. Should have heard Lysis screaming, though. Gods, that one could give the bats a time of it with those squeals." He paused there, drew a deep breath, and affected a high, exaggerated girly voice. "Oh, Perir, not my sweet Perir. Brandon, you brute." His ridiculous impromptu mummer's act was met with laughter from around the cookfire. Even Jon allowed himself to get swept up in it all. Only dimly could he recall his father telling him about the time Brandon almost killed a young man for Catelyn Tully's sake. Less still could he remember the boy's name. The only other thing he knew was that the boy had since risen high in King Robert's court. "So where is he now?" asked Lyanna. "Not dead, I hope." "He's not dead," Brandon replied, dismissively. "Anyway, Cat's silly sister is taking care of him. Old Hoster told me he's sending the boy away as soon as he's fit again. He's not like Jon here, 4 stab wounds, and still fighting like a demon." Jon flushed at the praise, as all eyes in the room turned to him. He drank deeply from his goblet of honey mead, finding it sweet but tasty. All the same, a treat like this was an unheard-of luxury at Castle Black, and he'd almost forgotten the taste of it. Meanwhile, the company gathered inside the pavilion tent soon dissolved into chatter again. Lyanna came over to sit between him and Brandon, leaving Robert alone to talk with Eddard. "You are a great swordsman, Jon," she said, gazing into the small cook fire. "Not many people can take Brandon on and walk away, even in a friendly sparring match. I mean, a boy like Petyr Baelish is one thing. That was just foolishness. But he's one of the best, and you were his equal. It makes me think there must have been several men who attacked you up on the mountain road." Jon raised a small smile. "Thank you, Lord, Now I think on it, I must have been half asleep when the attack happened. But like I said, I don't remember for sure." "Who is your master-at-arms?" she asked, turning to meet his gaze. Her eyes, he noted, were the exact same color as his. And his father's. "Sadir," Axamashri replied, plucking the 2 names almost out of thin air. Both had tried to kill him, both had unwittingly done him a favor. They had sent him here and showed him the true colors of his so-called brothers of the Night's Watch. But none of this could he divulge to Lyanna. "He must be good," she replied. "We have Sir Roderick Castle at Winterfell. He's a great master-at-arms, but I drive him to distraction by sneaking in on the boys' training sessions. If my father ever found out, he'd have Roderick's head, but when he's not around, I take lessons too. I can spar and I can duel. I've knocked Benjen into the dust more than once. A memory rose at the back of Jon's mind of a little girl ducking out of needlework lessons and getting under everyone's feet. He remembered the way he used to muss up her hair and call her little sister. Looking at Lyanna was just like looking at an older awry. The memory of her would have brought tears to his eyes had he been alone. "You're just like my little sister," he said solemnly. "She hates needlework and dancing and dressmaking. She just wants a sword in her hands." "I don't blame her," Lyanna laughed. "What is her name?" There was no harm in saying it, seeing as her birth was a good decade away. "Wait," he replied. "She's only 10. "Arya, that's a lovely name," replied Lyanna. She paused, regarding Jon closely for a long moment. Softly, she added, "You sound like you really love her." He felt a lump forming in his throat. "With all my heart." Sensing something wrong, Lyanna's brow twitched into a frown. "Where is she now?" "I don't know," he replied truthfully. "I haven't seen her for some time. Not since I left home." Carefully, she took the cup from his hands and placed it at his feet. Then she held his hands, squeezing them for comfort. "I pray you'll see her again one day." "As do I." With that, the subject of family was mercifully dropped. They whiled away a few more hours with chatter and drinking, then picking at the remains of the food until they were more than sated. After that, they talked some more. They talked of the Tourney, of the future, of their weddings and the children they hoped to have. Jon learned, for the first time, that his father was hoping to wed Lady Barbara Rexwell, a woman who hated him in later life, but he never did get the full story on that. Now he supposed he never would. For now they were all so young and so full of optimism for a future he knew they would never have. Armed with the knowledge he had, he could not join in. Eventually, as the hour grew later, he made his excuses and departed for the small tent. One of Lord Arryn's men had loaned him. By way of parting, Brandon gave him another brotherly slap on the back, while Lyanna smiled sweetly and kissed his cheek. Eddard reached up and shook his hand, while Benjen seemed to have fallen asleep while leaning against his sister's back, his head lolled against her shoulder as he softly snored. Benjen caught Jon's attention as well as his eye. He was half a boy. More than that, he was just a boy, full stop. Yet, in the next few weeks, he would be signing up for the Night's Watch. He had never considered it before, but Robert's rebellion would delay the moment of Ben's joining anyway. Still, it was at the tourney that he met that wandering crow and signed up. It was just one more thing that didn't add up. As he made his way out into the fresh night air, he breathed in gratefully. It had been hot and stuffy in that pavilion, and it felt good to be able to stretch his legs, especially after a big feed and a few drinks. He rubbed his eyes, yawned expansively, and started toward his tent, before bumping into an old man could have sworn was not there before he blinked. Old? He was very old, with pure white but marred by a wine-colored birthmark. He had snowy-colored hair and red eyes. His skin was whiter than milk glass. The red eyes and white skin combined to give him an uncanny resemblance to the face of a weirwood tree. It was almost disconcerting, the way he fixed Jon with an unbroken stare as he closed the gap between them. "Brandon will deliver a message to you soon, Lord Commander," he said. The breath caught in Jon's throat as he jumped back from the man. "Brandon's in there," he replied, pointing to the tent. But the man knew his title, his real title. Jon already realized he didn't mean that. "Brandon. Who are you?" The red-eyed man drew level with him, but did not stop and carried on walking. Jon whirled around to keep him in his line of vision, but when he looked back, the man had vanished. "Who was that?" asked Lyanna. "Was someone here?" Jon found her just as she was vacating the tent, realizing she had not seen the strange man. All she heard was Jon's voice. He tried to laugh it off. "I thought I saw someone. Must be the drink." Luckily it worked, and she paid it no more mind. "You and me both, Jon. Come on, let's both get our drunk selves safely a bed." Doing the courteous thing, however, he made sure Lyanna made it back to her own tent first, before returning to his own. In the 5 minutes it took to do that, he had almost succeeded in convincing himself he really had imagined the strange albino man. But it was enough so that, as soon as he pulled off his tunic to leave just his undershirt, he climbed into his bunk and fell straight into a deep sleep. Sutter Devos himself cut the ropes of the gallows. One by one, the stiffening traitors fell to the ground with a deadened thump like a dying tree shedding its own rotten fruit. Bowen Marsh and some others, whose names he did not even know. Finally, the boy, Ollie, he hesitated. Still sickened by the hanging of a mere child, no older than his own youngest son. After a second to compose himself, he hardened himself to the grim task and sawed at the rope around the dead boy's neck. "Burn them all," he softly said, directing the words at a nearby steward. "Make sure you do a thorough job, lad." Descending the steps, he found Melisandre waiting for him in the yard below. She was overlooking a large pyre, constructed from wood and coals, brought from beyond the wall, her red eyes doubtful but her posture confident as she turned to greet him. "Sir Davos," she said, "it is almost time." As though doubting her, he rolled his eyes to the heavens and determined the lateness of the hour by the darkness of the skies. True enough, dusk was thickening into a fast-gathering night. There was one more traitor left, one she had a special plan for. Normally, Sir Davos would have more than just a qualm or two about watching men burn. He had seen the Red Woman do it to more than one man he had called an ally, but he had no such trouble with Sir Rolf. While the hanged traitors were burning on a smaller pyre away from Castle Black, the lady had insisted a sacrifice be made of the ringleader. As far as Sir Davos was concerned, it couldn't happen to a nicer man. "Indeed it is, my lady," he agreed. "Is Sir Lozier ready?" "Is Rosier Lore ready?" More like, he thought to himself. If he was the Lord of Light, he'd be skeptical about accepting this traitor as a gift. A poor return, indeed, for a man of Jon Snow's caliber. "All we need is Sir Lysa's life," she said, as though she'd read his mind. "He himself doesn't need to be ready for anything. We make a gift of his life in return for Jon Snow's." In a strange sort of way, Davos could see her logic. For their purposes, it was no good hanging the bastard. He had to be fed to the flames and given directly to Rosier, or something like that. Still, it made him a touch uneasy. Come nightfall, Thorne was led from his cell bound at the wrists and escorted by Tormund Giantsbane and Dolorous Ed, while the whole regiment of brothers had come out to bear witness to the traitor's death. Davos had to admit, not many seemed sorry to see Thorne go. Many were openly smiling and taking wagers on how long he would take to burn. The funeral pyre of the hanged men was still burning. The smell of searing flesh caught at the back of Davos's throat, hardened to it now. He scarce noticed. He was just grateful for the warmth and the light of the flames. Meanwhile, he watched Sir Olazir's face. He had seen that look before. Determination to face death with silent stoicism. Despite the agony the condemned man knew awaited him, he also knew it would not last. Not long after Thorne was secured to the stake, Melisandre swept away in a swish of red skirts. When she returned, minutes later, she bore a torch lit from the dying funeral pyre close by. Before she could touch the torch to the stake, he stopped her. "Sir Lysier Thorne," he spoke aloud to the condemned man, "you have been sentenced to death for the crime of treason, for the attempted murder of your elected Lord Commander in contravention of the vows of the Night's Watch. Would you speak any final words?" The man's lips were a compressed white line, his jaw set firm. For a moment, Davos thought he would simply say nothing. But at the last moment, he spoke. I killed the Lord Commander, and that slab of meat you're keeping alive won't save you now," he began. "But what I did for the Watch. If I had my time again, I would do it all again. And now my watch is ended." With that, Sir Davos nodded to Melisandre. Without preamble, she touched the flames to the kindling and began her Valyrian recitals in a firm, authoritative voice. Switching to the common tongue, she called out to the Lord of Light, beseeching him to revive their real Lord Commander. Smoke soon billowed in the frigid night air. Kindling crackled as the flames grew taller and hungrier. A whoosh of air, a bang sounded from within the stake, and Thorne's bravery finally deserted him as he cried out in anguish, the flames licking at his legs. For Jon's sake, Davos made himself watch until the bitter end, when the screaming faded and the roar of the flames filled that terrible silence. "For the night is dark and full of terrors," Melisandre called out one more time, holding her arms wide open as if embracing the flames. "The night is dark and full of terrors," they all chorused back at her. At the heart of the flames, the dead man charred, folding in on himself before falling away to ash and cinders. "Jon!" Bran's voice was sweet as ever, gently coaxing him out of the darkness. "Jon, open your eyes now!" When he did, he was not in his bed. He was, instead, sitting beneath a tree overlooking a burning building. Although quite some distance away, he could feel the heat and the smoke was stinging his eyes. The screams of the people echoed in the night air, the roar of the flames reaching the heavens. Panicked, he got to his feet and started racing towards them. He could see no water nearby to form a bucket chain, but the blaze was long past that anyway. Before he got too far, however, a hand reached out and stopped him.
"John, you can't,"
said Bran. Startled, Jon whipped around to where his little brother was looking at him, smiling sadly. He was so shocked, he almost forgot the human tragedy unfolding. Not a half-mile away from him. "Bran, you're standing and walking." "Not really," he said. "Only here, when I'm inside the tree." Confused, Jon frowned at him. "I don't follow. Are you here with me in the past?" "I'm with Father and Aunt Lyanna and Uncle Benjen and Brandon. How come you're not?" Brienne, to his dismay, looked nonplussed. "We don't know what's happening, Jon, but I'm not with you. When we explore the visions inside the tree, no one can see us." Wait, Jon cut over him. "Who is we? What do you mean by inside the tree and what visions?" Brienne shook his head. "Jon, please pay attention to what's happening. I can't explain everything, but I will find out. I promise you. All I know is, when I go back, no one can see me or the three-eyed raven. But they can see you. It's like you're really there. And if you are really there, then it won't be for nothing. You need to pay attention to what we're showing you." As Jon walked them closer to the fire, it became clear no one could see either of them now. He and Bran were invisible as people ran screaming from the burning building. It was huge, too, although blackened with masonry crashing down all around them. He could see the building had been beautiful and opulent. If there was anyone left inside now, they must surely be burned to death. But even as Jon reached that conclusion, he saw two figures emerge from within the roaring flames, one carrying the other in his arms. A tall man, easily 7 foot tall. He carried a woman with a swollen belly. Her screams tore through the night over the blaze and must have split the ears of the tall man. "She's pregnant," said Jon, stepping closer. "Bran, is this—" His words trailed off as the woman screamed again. The man, whom Jon could now see was on fire, dropped her. He crumpled to the floor, dying an agonizing death. Meanwhile, the woman's labor sent her screams to the heavens above and the pits of hell below. People were rushing everywhere. Bodies dead and charred pulled from the fiery ruins amid shouts of anger and shock. "Summerhall," said Bran, finishing Jon's sentence. Moments passed before the wails of a newborn infant pierced the din already raging around them. The rescued Queen Rhaegar collapsed back, fainting, or so it looked to Jon. But the newly born prince, Rhaegar Targaryen, continued to exercise his lungs, even though he must have been choking on all that smoke. Finally, a living person recognized them, and Jon breathed a sigh of relief as they were both pulled clear of the burning hall. "That man was Sir Duncan the Tall," Jon remarked distantly. "Do you remember, Bran? We grew up hearing all about him." As he turned away, he noticed a man picking something up from the ruins of the hall. Something small and roughly round in shape. Paying it no mind, he turned back to Bran. "Why did I need to see this?" he asked. "I don't know," Bran said. "I haven't got time to explain anything now. But I promise I'll come and find you at the Tourney. Wait for me in the God's Wood." Already the vision was fading. Jon could feel himself being violently shaken and rocked, as though he were being tossed around on a stormy sea. Bran grew dimmer and darker, and when Jon managed to open his eyes again, the other Brandon was looking back at him, wide-eyed and eager. "Wake up! Come quick!" he called down to Jon. "Lannister caught your attackers." He still had the dream of Summerhall fresh in his mind, and his thoughts were all over the place. But his tarrying had caused Brandon to stop and physically lift him out of his bunk. Groggy, still half drunk on sleep, he stumbled into the blindingly bright day. He stood in the entrance of the tent, blinking rapidly as he adjusted to the light and trying to make sense of the scene before him. Lyanna had a grown man in a headlock and was dragging him around the clearing, scolding him soundly about picking on people his own size and promising to teach him some manners. Another man with a bloodied nose and split lip lay whimpering on the ground. Meanwhile, Eddard was patching up a small man dressed in the green of Greywater Watch, Lord Howland Reed. The drunken squires, Jon remembered hearing about this, and he almost laughed. "She's already sent another running for the hills, but she got these two," said Brandon proudly. Then he called out to Lyanna, Go on, sis. Teach him a lesson. Noticing his arrival, Lyanna stopped dragging the man around, but fastly maintained the headlock she had him in. Are these the men who attacked you? She demanded, the rage of the wolf blood in her eyes. No, he stammered back. Just let them go, Eddard implored. They're not even worth it anyway. We know which houses they serve, and their lords will be informed. She let them go, releasing her grip on the now choking squire. When he ran from her, she kicked out and tripped him up for good measure. Dusting off her hands, she dashed over to Howland Reed and took the damp cloth from Eddard's hands. It's all right, my lord, she said, all rage gone from her now. We'll take care of you. Come to the tourney with us and enjoy yourself. Forget those rude squires. It was a familiar pattern. Now that he was no longer needed, Jon shook his head in bemusement and returned to his tent. Jon knew how it went. An attack on a bannerman was an attack on said bannerman's lord. If a liege lord could not protect his bannerman, he had no right being liege lord in the first place. Successive lords of Winterfell had had that message drilled into them, and Lord Rickard would have been no exception, nor his own children. As such, Brandon and Lyanna took Howland Reed's beating to heart. Also, it was worse than they had first realized. The little crannogman had been kicked repeatedly in the chest. His delicate, almost childlike hands had been stamped on, and bruising was spreading across his ribs and belly. His breathing was labored and rasping through swollen, bloodied lips. Every so often, his moss-green eyes rolled to the back of his head, showing only the whites as he lost consciousness. It was 4-on-1, Lyanna snapped as she dabbed at Lord Reed's extensive injuries. How is that even sport? What did they gain from it? There's no honor in bullying. Viciously beating anyone is never sport, Eddard pointed out. He and Lord Robert had procured a makeshift stretcher and brought the Stark wheelhouse over to carry Reed the rest of the way to the tourney. He wouldn't be walking for quite some time yet, Jon assessed. Jon helped bind some of the wounds as best he knew how from many rangings north of the wall. Out there he had had to be quick when someone was hurt, and his few skills proved valuable now. Lyanna noticed and handed him fresh bindings, gently instructing him on what to patch up next. Every so often, a jolt of pain made the crannogman whimper, like a dog with a broken leg. Jon would apologize and work faster, getting the painful process out of the way quicker. When Eddard returned again, he brought with him a skein of water which he pressed to Howland's lips. Take small sips, my lord. Small sips, don't gulp it. Once they had done all they could, they lifted Howland onto the stretcher and into the back of the Stark's wheelhouse, where he could lie down and rest. Even so, when the Maester finally arrived to give professional help, Lyanna continued to seethe. I should have apprehended them, she said as they returned to their camp. The sun was up and they had to get a move on before they missed the opening of the tourney. Had I apprehended them, I could have handed them over to their lords for proper punishment. Instead, I lashed out, and now they're running scared. But really nothing will be done. Alas, what's a girl to do? Brandon mock-teased her, before turning serious again. Lozio Howland could well be dead if you hadn't stepped in. You did right by him. Brady has the right of it, sister, Eddard agreed, putting his arm around her shoulders for comfort. Had we arrived sooner, more might have been done. As it was just you against 4 men. Jon had to agree with his father, but he stayed out of the discussion. As far as they were concerned, he was just another straggler, picked up on their way down the mountains. Any intrusion into family territory, where he would not be welcome, could result in him being sent away. So, he turned his attention to dismantling the camp and getting the pack mules loaded up for the last mile or two of their journey. The closer he got, the more intrigued he became. He could see Harrenhal now, just across the water where it stood on the north shore. Banners and sigils woven into rich fabrics hung from every crenelle on the outer battlements. Each of the 7 great houses were on proud display. Prominent among them, the red 3-headed dragon of House Targaryen. The sight of their standards fluttering in the strengthening breeze almost shocked him. He had never seen it before. In his time, the Targaryens were a dirty secret, an historical error that King Robert had staunchly corrected. Now there it was among the other great houses, as bold as brass. Once they were all rounded up and ready to go, the Starks stuck together as they entered the castle itself. Should even one of them go astray, it would take forever to find them again. But once inside, Jon couldn't help but stop his horse to take it all in. Although the outer walls had been spruced up, it was inside that had been utterly transformed. The stands were freshly painted and the tilt yard freshly sanded. Everywhere he looked, silks fluttered in the wind as nobility of every rank circulated freely among themselves. High-born ladies passed him by in clouds of perfume, while lordlings and gallant knights practiced their swordplay and running at rings in preparation for the upcoming feats of chivalry. He found himself thinking of Sansa, trying to picture her face. If she could see all of this, it would be her paradise. Although the handiwork of Aegon's dragons was still clearly visible, the castle itself was still the largest in the realm as well as the most extravagant. Its vast towers were connected by broad open bridges, all of which had been decorated with silk flags, banners, and multicolored streamers. Others had been draped over windowsills and adorned every battlement. Meanwhile, on the high steps leading into what Jon assumed was a great common hall, Old Went himself waved his guests inside with his daughters at his side. With no idea of where he was going, he soon found himself being swept along with the crowds. Until Lyanna pulled him back into line. "Careful, Jon, stick with us or we'll never find you again." "I've secured you a place by telling the stewards you're my squire," Brandon said, apologetically. "Don't worry about it, though. I won't actually ask you to do my squiring." Lyanna suppressed a laugh. "Believe that, you'll believe anything. He'll have you wiping his fat arse by the end of the day." Gods be praised. She has her sense of humor back. Jon did not mind being Brandon's squire. On the contrary, he had been worried about where he would be sleeping, especially with Longclaw so vulnerable to theft. A tent would have been out of the question. "Thank you, my lord," he replied. Brandon waved a hand at his gratitude. "It's nothing. Now come on, let's get unpacked." "Oh, Jon, before you go," said Lyanna, stopping him with a hand to his arm. "You're accompanying me to the feast tonight." Caught at unawares, he couldn't very well refuse. "But Lord Robert won't mind. He'll be too busy polishing his hammers," she cut in, then turned away and started walking. The subject was closed. They were housed in the Wailing Tower, up several flights of stairs, and in rooms with windows that looked out over the tiltyard. Jon had not seen them as he entered the castle, and they were vast. The stands at the far end were decorated, but the centerpiece was the Targaryen sigil of the three-headed dragon. Striking and bold, it caught his eye even from far above. For now, it was empty as all the guests made their way into the Hall of 100 Hearths for the great opening feast. But as he himself was getting ready to join them, a knock sounded at his door. "It's open," he called out. He turned from the window to find Benjen peering nervously into his room. "Is now a bad time?" Jon greeted the boy with a smile. "Not at all. How can I help, my lord?" Still nervous, Benjen closed the door behind him. The room was tiny, seeing as Jon was a lowly squire for the occasion, so he only needed to walk a few steps before sitting himself down on the pallet bed. From within his cloak, Benjen withdrew a scroll of parchment. "They think you're our squire," he said, offering up the scroll to Jon. "You would be able to get all this with no questions asked." Curious, Jon unrolled the parchment. Breastplate, spurs, mail shirt, shield, lance. He lowered it and smiled knowingly at the boy. "You want to enter the lists? A mystery knight, I presume." A blush crept into his face, and he couldn't quite meet Jon's gaze. "Yes. You're 12, Benjen," he pointed out, but not unkindly. "Those bigger knights will knock you out of your saddle and into the middle of next week." Indignant now, the boy tried to look affronted. Sir Barristan Selmy was 10 when he first entered the lists. Jon did his best to remain concerned, without it looking like patronization. Yes, and he was knocked out of his saddle and into the middle of the next week by a much bigger opponent. Prince Duncan Targaryen, if I remember rightly. He looked again at the equipment needed and the measurements. It was for someone small and slight, but still taller and larger than Benjen. It didn't seem right to him. Frowning, he glanced up from the scroll again. He had been around young lads, his age enough, to know when something was not as it seemed. "Is this really for you?" Benjen nodded, but his blush deepened. "I swear you will be in no trouble for doing this. If anyone finds out, I will make sure they know the blame lies with me and me alone." "Damn right you will," Jon murmured. With a heavy sigh, he put the list in his pocket. "Leave it with me. You'll have it by tomorrow, my lord." Benjen beamed brightly, bounced off the bed, and made for the door, presumably beating a retreat before Jon could change his mind. Then he paused by the door. "Ow, and another thing, you're to leave it all in the Godswood by the Heart Tree. Someone will collect it once you're gone. Don't hang around either. Just leave it and go. And don't tell anyone." "Promise?" It got fishier by the second. Nevertheless, Jon found himself agreeing. I promise. Lyanna was a picture of loveliness when Jon met her outside her chambers. She wore a long, flowing gown of silver and pale forget-me-not blue silk, with brocades of samite. Her dark hair was in a plait and decorated with delicate sapphires that caught the light and winked a dazzling blue whenever she turned her head. Her bodice was laced tight, narrowing her waist so that Jon thought he could put his hands around it no problem. Meanwhile, he was wearing a formal outfit cobbled together from Brandon and Eddard's unwanted cast-offs. Even Brandon's stuff was too big for him. His shirt sleeves almost covered his hands and the doublet was almost too tight. She held up her arm for him to take and smiled. Thank you for agreeing to do this. You look good, by the way. He hadn't been given much choice, but he did not mention that. It's all right, I would have been attending on my own otherwise. You're not alone, she said, anxiously. You're still with us. I just needed someone to keep Robert away. He couldn't help but wonder why. From what little he had seen of them together, he was attentive and kind. But all the time, she shied from him. Now she was using him, Jon, as a shield from her ardent suitor. As if reading his thoughts, she continued. Robert will never keep to one woman. He has a bastard in the Vale already. Maestone, I'll be the demure lady wife kept at Storm's End, and he'll be off wenching and whoring. Jon knew what he knew, that Robert had torn the realm apart to save his lady love. They were the stories he and his siblings had been raised hearing. The demon of the trident, righteous in his wrath against the abductor and rapist, Rhaegar Targaryen. She was a loss King Robert had never recovered from. Cold and calculating Cersei Lannister was the woman who drove him to ruin. Maybe he will change once you are wed, he suggested. Lord Eddard seems so fond of him, and I can't imagine him tolerating anything dishonorable. Lyanna's laughter chimed down the stone passageway they were strolling along. Once he has me and no longer has to work at it, he'll be bored within hours. Robert only wants what he cannot have, or what he thinks is hard to get. Women are sport to men like him. Then she sighed and turned her large gray eyes to him. Don't worry, I'm not saying all men are like that. Just ones like Robert. Actually, I don't know why our Ned is so fond of him. She paused there, bringing him to a stop, also, and glanced around the gallery they found themselves in. Do you know where we're going? Not really, he replied, truthfully. I was just following you. I was following you too, she admitted. This whole place is a maze. Make it... They did. The Hall of 100 Hearts was vast and filled to the rafters with the rank and file nobility from right across the 7 kingdoms. Once more, the banners of the great houses were hanging from the rafters. Direwolves, roses, krakens, and lions were everywhere he looked. The falcon of the Vale flew alongside stag of House Baratheon, and silk streamers lined the length of the hall. Being with one of the great houses himself, he found himself seated a stone's throw from the high table. As he looked along the length of the high table, he tried to guess at the diner's identity. One man he recognized from earlier as Old Wind. Oswald Went was alongside him, dressed in the snowy white cloak of the Kingsguard over his silver-scaled armor. The 2 girls could only be Old Went's daughters, but everyone else was a mystery to him. There was a thin woman sitting beside one of the high seats with a canopy over her head. She had brown hair and sallow skin. Not pretty, but her features were soft and delicate. As she sat there, another, far more beautiful woman appeared at her side, whispered in her ear, and then ducked away again. Before she left, she curtsied to a man standing behind the sallow woman. Jon could just make out his snowy white Kingsguard cloak. Then, just for a moment, Jon's gaze locked into that of the sallow-skinned lady, before he quickly looked away again. Lyanna leaned over to him and whispered, "That must be Princess Ayaya." "I did not mean to gape at her," he answered. "She must be used to it," Lyanna said. "I mean, she's a princess, and our future queen. People are bound to look." "She looked like a doe staring down the shaft of a hunter's arrow," he remarked. Was it Rhaegar that had her looking so alone and so scared? He could not help but wonder, given what he knew of the Crown Prince. Despite himself, he glanced at the suspected princess again. In her dark brown hair, she wore a circlet of silver and gold entwined, confirming her status, if not her identity. Once more, Lyanna leaned toward him and whispered in his ear. "Do you see that man standing behind her?" she said. When Jon nodded, she added, "That's Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning. The man, the legend." Jon almost choked on the wine he had just sipped. Lyanna laughed, then, ribbing him gently about his boyish hero worship. It was far from that, however. It was the sight of so many people who had shaped the fabric of their lives, all gathered under one roof. But it was his secret foreknowledge that had been kept deep in his heart. Still, he glanced back at the infamous knight, trying to catch sight of that equally infamous blade that was as pale as milk glass. Sadly, the wisp of a princess was blocking his view of it. While he was looking, all chatter suddenly ceased, and a fanfare rang through the halls, followed by the scraping of wooden benches against the flagstone floor. As everyone got to their feet, Jon followed suit, nerves stretching badly, as he knew what was coming next. Sure enough, moments later, a herald's voice rang out clearly. All rise for his grace, King Daenerys, the second of his name, and for his queen, Rhaegar Targaryen. Also, their most noble son, Crown Prince Rhaegar Targaryen. Although risen, they all bowed and dropped into curtsies as the royal family was led out to the high table. Just then, Jon did not dare to try and catch a glimpse of them. Not until the signal for them to sit again had come. When that happened, he took the liberty of a long and detailed look at all of them. Everett looked like his reputation, mad as a bag of snakes. His long silver hair was tatty and hung like damp rats' tails around his shoulders. His nails had not been cut in what looked like years, and his skin was pale and half covered with cuts from the Iron Throne. Queen Rhaegar was thin and taut at Everett's side, her narrow eyes fixed on the back of the hall. Rhaegar, however, was a sharp contrast to them both. Surprising as it was to Jon, given how inbred the Targaryens were, Rhaegar was strong and handsome where his parents were slight and shifty. His silver gold hair was long, but well-maintained, and his clothes were of the highest quality. He carried himself with confidence, rather than the deep suspicion that was dulling the Mad King's eyes. As he took them all in, Lyanna nudged him sharply. "Take my advice," she said softly. "Don't look too long lest the king should notice you." Jon flushed as he realized what he had done. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." "Is he as mad as they say?" she hissed. "No more of that talk. It's dangerous." That dire warning killed what was left of his near-sated curiosity. Instead, he focused on the food that was sent down to them from the high table. Princess Iak sent them fresh shrimp as a starter, followed closely by a green salad from the queen. All of the tables were remembered, while the servants also brought trenchers and kept the wine flowing. He found himself drinking more than he ate, and, as with all feasts, he quickly found himself wishing it were over. Proceedings were prolonged, even after the sumptuous food had been eaten, as a new member of the King's Guard had to be sworn in by King Daenerys. Jon almost choked as Sir Jaime Lannister's name was read out loud. He was to be sworn in by the very same king he would go on to kill. The Lannisters' table was directly opposite the Starks. He recognized both Jaime and Cersei from their visit to Winterfell. They were younger, just as beautiful, and just as haughty-looking. Only Lord Tyrion was absent, and Lord Tywin himself. Risking another chance to talk, he leaned in to Lyanna and asked if she knew anything. "I've heard he's furious about the appointment," she whispered back, eyes still on the now kneeling knight in golden armor. "I think it's why he's refused to attend the tourney." Having overheard their whispered conversation, Brandon chimed in. "It was bad enough that Aerys refused his offer of Lady Cersei's hand in marriage to the prince. Now I hear things go from bad to worse between them." So, the ill feeling had already begun. Jon made a note of it as he looked back to the high table. Jaime had taken his vows, and the king had presented him with his white cloak. The fabric had become caught on his long, curling fingernails, and every man and woman in the room had looked away. All the while, Prince Rhaegar sat stiffly beside his wife and watched proceedings with a distant look in his indigo eyes. Jon couldn't help but notice how tense everyone at the high table looked. Not one of them was enjoying themselves. Finally, to his immense relief, the tables were cleared and pushed to the sides as the dancing began. Musicians were playing from balconies and eaves, but Jon was in no mood to sit and listen. He made his excuses to Lyanna and began making for the nearest exit. Inside the hall, it had grown hot and stuffy, and hundreds of people, all crowding in on him, felt suffocating. He almost collided with a dancing couple, apologized hastily, even though they had continued, uninterrupted, and carried on his way. But as he reached the exit, a woman's voice called out, stopping him before he could cross the threshold. "Sir!" He almost ignored her, thinking she was addressing one of the numerous knights thronging the hall. Then a hand touched the back of his cloak, halting him bodily. He turned to find the girl that had been attending Princess Eolia, looking back at him. Out of respect, he inclined his head, not sure what to say or do next. "You dropped this, sire," she said, handing him a scroll of parchment. To his horror, it was the list that Benjen had given to him earlier that day. "Thank you, my lady." As he took it from her, he noted her appearance again. Her hair was black, but her eyes were violet and possessed of a strange, haunting quality. Her skin was pale as cream. She raised a small smile, showing neat white teeth. But even that gesture did not diminish the odd, sad look in her eyes. "I didn't read it," she assured him. "I just thought it might be something important." "Actually, it is rather important, so I'm grateful, my lady." He realized she was making conversation. Otherwise, she would have given him his list back and then left. But still, she lingered, held out her hand, and then introduced herself. "If I could be so bold as to make your acquaintance, I am Lady Ashera of House Dane." The name came like a slap in the face. A horn blast heralded the new arrivals, followed quickly by the creaking of rusty chains as the portcullis was raised. Sarah Davos broke off the conversation he was having and turned to the source of the noise. First came a large, blonde-haired man sat on a destrier. Moments later, he realized the man was a woman. Second, a young girl who was definitely a girl. Her mount is a sorry-looking Garen who had seen better days. Third and final, a young lad wrapped in a rough-spun cloak, perched on a sturdy mule, brought up the back end of their bedraggled procession. The girl in the middle dismounted and lowered her hood, revealing disheveled, coppery hair. Seemingly in a daze, her wide blue eyes were full of fear and confusion as she turned a circle, taking in her grim surroundings. Meanwhile, the work within Castle Black slowly ground to a halt as the men became aware of the odd newcomers. When nobody else stepped forward, Sir Davos did the best he could. "My lady, I am Sir Davos of House Seaworth. May I ask what your business?" The big wench, who seemed to have caught the eye of Tormund Giantsbane, cut in over him. "Sir, I am Brienne of Tarth, and this is Lady Sansa of House Stark. We must speak with the Lord Commander as a matter of urgency." Sir Davos felt his insides turn as cold as the grave. "Oh," was all he could say. His feelings grew worse as Lady Sansa turned to him, a look of resigned anguish already in her eyes. One by one, the brothers of the Night's Watch filed into the yard, all of them regarding Sansa with pity in their eyes. Not one of them dared break the news she knew was on their lips. Dazed, she saw again the knight who had welcomed them. The look on his face had told her all she needed know, and it was nothing she couldn't have guessed. Just like her father, her brother, and her mother, and all their loyal bannermen. Jon was gone before she knew it. She turned a circle like a trapped animal, taking in the desolate surroundings and the grim faces who populated them. There was not a scrap of solace anywhere, less still sanctuary. The knight spoke again, but she did not hear his words. Only Brienne, placing one gauntleted hand on her arm, brought her back around. Silent with grief, she found herself being steered toward a timber keep and through a low door. Warmth from a number of burning braziers made her cold face burn, but the sight of him laid out on the bed wrenched her heart. Before she could see the wounds, a woman with coppery hair and a heart-shaped face tried to pull up the furs to cover his chest. Too late, Sansa had already seen the worst and the best. "He's breathing," she pointed out, almost tripping over her skirts as she descended on his bedside. Brienne tried to stop her. "My lady, please." She acted only out of concern, Sansa knew. But she saw what she saw, and when she pressed a hand to his bare breast, she could feel the skip-jump of Jon's heart. For a long moment, she studied his face, slack with sleep and motionless. He looked so much older than the last time she had seen him, with his full beard and a battle scar over his right eye. Only the heartbeat betrayed signs of life, but that was enough for her. "I don't understand," she said, looking up at the woman as an early desperate hope peeked through her layers of grief. "He's not dead, he's just sleeping. Hasn't the Maester seen to him?" She could see that the woman was dressed all in red, matching her peculiar red eyes. "This sleep is more than sleep." "He is somewhere else, my lady. Somewhere we don't know. To answer your question, the Maester died. He is yet to be replaced." Despite the severity of the situation, Sansa managed a small smile. "My other brother, Bran, was in a coma after he fell from the broken tower. He should have been killed as well. Don't you see? This is the same. When his body is healed the best it can, Jon will wake just like Bran did." But her budding optimism was kept in check by the grim faces surrounding her. Not even Bran's example convinced them. If anything, they seemed to pity her even more, like she was a naive child clutching at straws. Your other brother was probably never dead in the first place. Although unflinchingly to the point, the Red Woman spoke gently. Jon was dead, and he had been dead for some hours. But his heart beat, she thought to herself, not daring to speak aloud, should her last hope be snatched away from her. It seemed the other woman read her thoughts. I asked the Lord of Light to bring your brother back, and he did, she explained. He restored his heartbeat, brought the breath back to his lungs, but no more. Turning away from the woman, she let her gaze rove over Jon's body once more. The sight of him lying there made her heart break all over again. Meanwhile, the unthinkable came unbidden to her. As unwelcome as it was, she needed the truth. Are you saying he could stay like this forever? Maybe, replied the Red Woman. Maybe not. At a time when she desperately needed assurances, these vagaries were all the more frustrating. Her earlier surge of hope flattened in the face of the unknown. Making it worse, she scarce understood a word of what the woman was saying. The Lord of Light, fire magic, and people brought back from the dead. She had never heard of such things. She had seen Thoros of Myr riding in a tourney with a flaming sword once, and knew that had something to do with a foreign religion. But her understanding stretched no further than that. Before long, all she wanted was to be alone with her brother. Once that luxury had been afforded her, she sat by his bedside on a rickety old chair and held his hand. With her other hand, she smoothed back the hair from his brow, willing him to respond to her touch. Even just the twitch of a muscle would suffice. She scrutinized his face, but still nothing came. Only a ragged breath here and a sleepy sigh there. Just enough to remind everyone he was still alive, but not enough to hint at a full recovery anytime soon. Sansa did not realize she was crying until the tears dripped from the tip of her nose and splashed onto his cheek. The way the teardrop landed made it look as if he were crying too, and she watched as it rolled down his cheekbone. Alone with her thoughts, she remembered the last time she had seen him. It was the same day a stupid little girl with a head full of dreams had left for the capital, and a rejected, motherless boy had left for the wall. Both seemed like strangers to her now. Only a knock at the door jolted her out of her reverie. She looked up as it opened, and a man with lank hair and a dour look on his face entered. He faltered when he saw her still sat by Jon's bedside. In his hands he carried pestle and mortar, the contents of which steamed in the frigid air of the open doorway. "Forgive me, milady," he said, sounding faintly embarrassed. He held up the pestle and mortar like some kind of offering. It's his dinner time, you see. Sansa let go of Jon's hand and hastily swiped her tears away. "Oh, I'm sorry, I must be in your way." He sat himself down in her vacated seat. "Today, it's the marinated juices of chicken and liver stock, spiced with the essence of root veg and dripping. Or, as it's better known, the pissy, watery remains from the bottom of the common cookpot." Knowing he was only trying to jest, she managed a weak laugh. "Sounds delicious." She caught a glimpse of what was in that pestle, and it was literally just the juices from a broth or stew. Enough to sustain him without choking him. The newcomer used a wooden spoon to carefully drizzle it onto his lips so it would slowly trickle down his gullet. She remembered how her mother had done the same for Bran. As he worked, he chattered away almost to himself. A litany of dry and dour observations while she watched and listened from the shadows between two of the braziers. "I miss his dour face looming from the shadows. It brightened the place up no end," he said, monotone and flat. "I talk to him often, though, milady. Actually, they're the most enlightening conversations I've ever had." Sansa frowned. "But he can't talk back, can he?" "Exactly," he retorted, spooning another helping of watery broth down her brother's throat. "Seriously, though, I do talk to him. Tell him what's going on out there." "Well, his ears aren't hurt, are they?" He paused to glance over his shoulder at Sansa, midway through a spoonful of broth. The man had a point, she thought. "Excuse me," she began, trailing off. "Ed," he replied. "Ed Tollett, but they call me Dolorous, Ed." Sansa couldn't begin to imagine why. "Ed! Can I do that? I know how. I saw my mother feed my other brother when he was in a coma." Ed grimaced. "Here's me thinking. The Tollett's got all the luck. Then I met the Starks of Winterfell," he muttered, handing over the pestle. "Mind he doesn't enjoy himself too much. I'm certain he'll manage to restrain himself." She managed a bemused smile as she watched Ed's retreating back disappear out of the door and into the night beyond. Alone with Jon once more, she set the pestle aside and leaned in close to him. Before she said anything, she pressed her lips to his cheek and kissed him, finding his skin warm, almost hot, even. Something she did not dwell on for long. "Jon, it's me," she said, willing him to hear her. "It's Sansa. I came all this way to find you so you can't die now. You have to wake up." She drew back, looking to see if he gave any sign of having heard her. For the briefest of moments, his brow creased, and a ragged breath sounded from parted lips. Then nothing. His brow smoothed, and his breathing regained its normal rhythm. A familiar feeling of dire desperation jumped out at her once more. "Jon," she said, more forcefully. "Jon, please." Still nothing, but for the sudden beating of crow-black wings and a flurry of feathers as the bird flapped and squawked its way down from the rafters. Alarmed, Sansa pushed her chair back and fixed on the bird that had landed on her brother's chest. It glared back at her with beady black eyes. It spread its wings again and ruffled its feathers. "Stark," it squawked. "Stark." "Sansa." Jon called her name out loud as he awoke, choking for air. But as he gathered his wits and steadied his racing heart, he realized he was still in the same place. All around him, in the small antechamber, were old bits of armor and a broken lance. A high window let in the broad morning sunshine and lit up the dust motes spiraling through the air. Dejected and frustrated, Jon fell back against the pallet bed and tried to marshal his thoughts. Normally, when he slept, he heard Ser Davos or Ed, faint, like they were in the background of a distant tunnel, but still distinct. Sometimes, it was Lady Melisandre, and often she spoke in a foreign language. At least Sansa was a vast improvement on all of them. Slowly, limbs aching with stiffness, he climbed off the pallet and dressed as quick as he could. Benjen's list was on the side counter, and he wanted to find the necessary equipment before noon. There was some lemon and mint water left in a jug at his door to wash away the stale taste in his mouth. The tartness of it made him wince, but it did the job. Not long after that, he was out in the yard dodging groups of rowdy knights, all getting ready for the upcoming jousts and melees. The atmosphere was alive with shouts and the ring of steel on steel. As he waited in the seemingly endless queue at the forge, he found himself lost in what was happening all round him. Not too far away, young squires fired at archery butts while young lords ran at the quintains. A few men and boys who clearly had both eyes fixed on the prizes took it deadly seriously. They measured the tilt yards and counted the paces against the length of the lances. Most, however, were there only for the games, the excitement and the free drinks. A young lady rolled her eyes at a knight who was clearly attempting to get beneath her skirts, while, close by, a silver-clad knight knelt with difficulty at the feet of another maid as she tied a wisp of silk to his wrist. The drunken bawds coexisted with the chivalrous cheek by jowl, and all converged to paint a picture straight from one of Sansa's books. It wasn't long before he found himself thinking of her. Could she be at Castle Black? It had been so long since they last spoke, but he knew her voice. She said his name and begged him to wake up. Even in his sleep, the anguish had overwhelmed him. Then he awoke, her name on his lips and gasping for air again. He was so lost in thought, he hadn't realized he had reached the front of the queue. The master armorer was looking at him mutinously. "You can see how busy we are, sir," he thundered at him. "Hang around there all day and the tourney will be over by the time we get you fixed up." "Sorry," Jon replied, jolting himself. "This is what I need. It's for my lord, not me." The master armorer looked like master armorers everywhere. Big limbs roped with thick, sinewy muscles from hammering at iron and steel all day, every day. His small, gimlet eyes looked over the list incredulously, clutching it in greasy, blackened hands. "You're having a laugh, aren't you?" he inquired, brusquely. Confused, Jon tried to look small and innocuous. "Come again?" "You mean you don't have any of this stuff, but you've come here to find it," he clarified. Jon looked around at the others, awaiting service. They all brought their own armor and weapons. Anything spare would have been long gone by now. "Did I mention that we're a bit on the busy side just now?" the armorer continued. Then he heaved a sigh and relented. Satisfied that Jon knew he was going well above and beyond the call of duty, he added, "Wait here. We might have some spare kit out the back. I'm not making no promises, mind you." Relieved, Jon grinned and thanked him, but he was already ambling off into the semi-darkness of his forge. Catching a glimpse inside, Jon could see hundreds of young lads all his age or a little more. each of them busy with hammers and tongues as blades were refined in lethal hot fires before being plunged, hissing and spitting, into vats of cold water. Several others sent up a deathly clangor as they hammered out breastplate and fixed dents in leg guards. The air was thick with steam and smoke and sweat. After being gone for what seemed an age, the armorer returned, pulling a small cart behind him. Jon repaid his efforts by having the coin ready as soon as he returned. "Thank you, Master Armor," he said, giving him the gold. "My lord will hear of your excellent service." The man bit the coin before answering. "You see that he does, lad. Now be gone with you." Jon hauled the cart over the cobbles so he was out of the way of the other patrons, far enough to somewhere he could inspect the goods in private. He removed a rough spun dust covering and saw a hodgepodge of bits and pieces, all mismatched. A black battered breastplate had been roughly mended but was still all scratched. The gauntlets looked fine to him, but clearly came from two different pairs. Still, one was a left and the other was a right. There was a vest of chainmail that had been mended numerous times, and still had rusting rings here and there. The shield looked as old as time itself, but was still in one piece. On the front, a weirwood tree laughed back at him. He almost laughed himself. Satisfied that all was present and roughly correct, he began dragging his cart over to the Godswood. To find his way there, all he had to go on was a roughly drawn-out plan of the castle given to him by one of the stewards. Still, it eventually got him there, through the keep, across a quadrangle, the exit of which was blocked by a gaggle of fully armored knights, all comparing lances. Jon excused himself, attempting to shoulder his way through the throng, and the wheel of his cart got caught in the guttering, almost spilling the contents. "Watch out there," one of the knights scolded. Jon flushed in the face as he tried to right his cart. "I'm sorry, but I must get this back to my lord. He's waiting for me." All he succeeded in doing was attracting the attention of the other knights, who now crowded around the exit gate and formed a wall that blocked his path. There was trouble coming. He knew it. He let the cart go and reached for the pommel of Longclaw. Although he stood no chance against so many, he would at least send a message that he was no lowly squire, and he was not to be toyed with. "You draw your sword in our presence, sir," one of them challenged. Jon sighed wearily. "There would be no trouble if only you would allow me to pass." "Pass what?" "You couldn't even pass wind, my lady," another retorted. "Very funny." Jon rolled his eyes, infuriating the knight who had cracked the joke. Before the situation could escalate, another voice rang out from beyond the gates. "What's gotten into you lot? Let the man pass, for the love of the gods." Expecting even more trouble now an outsider had involved themselves, Jon was taken aback when they all suddenly fell away and dropped to one knee. As they fell, the speaker was revealed. All Jon noted was the silver-gold hair of the Targaryen prince before he too realized what was happened and bent the knee in turn. He wasn't kneeling for long, however, before a delicate hand reached for his shoulder and raised him up again. Jon found himself looking into a pair of dark indigo eyes, as they were both of a perfectly equal height, the strangest eyes he had ever seen. "I must apologize for my ill-behaved knights, sir. They will be reprimanded," he said, his voice surprisingly deep, for a man so fair. "I trust you are not hurt." "No, your grace," Jon stammered. Rhaegar reached for the cart, leaving his unruly knights kneeling on the cobbles. "Who is this for? I'll see to it your lord does not punish you for being late with it. I know how bloody unreasonable they can be at events like this." Jon could only grasp his wits together and carry on as if this were a normal encounter. "Thank you, your grace, but my master won't mind. He's good to me. I'll just be on my way, though." But the prince was leaning down to inspect the cart. "That's an odd assortment. Is this really for a lord?" He had picked up the mismatched gauntlets and was now inspecting them closely. At a loss for what to do, Jon could only watch. He certainly wasn't about to knock them out of the prince's hands. Dead or alive, in this reality he was still the crown prince. He could only squirm as the truth found its way out of him. "It's for my lord's son, your grace. He wants to enter the jousts, but he is not of age," he confessed. Without another word, Rhaegar put the gauntlets back and turned to Jon with a knowing smile on his face. "In that case, his secret is safe with me." He paused, glancing over his shoulder to another knight. A Kingsguard by the look of him. A boy entering the lists without consent. "Sir Barristan, this story sounds familiar, does it not?" Sir Barristan laughed aloud. "See to it the young lordling learns well from the thrashing he'll get in that tilt yard, Sir. I know I did." Jon laughed, the gesture sounding every bit as forced as it was. He thanked them both, bowed briefly to the prince, and almost ran the rest of the way, with the cart bouncing over the cobbles behind him. He did not dare look back, no matter how thrilling his encounter with a legendary knight and a dead prince would be for any future grandchildren he might have. As he left the gated quadrangle, he found himself in another keep that led out onto the flowstone yard where the serious competitors drilled mercilessly. He saw one man taking on 3 others and still managing to come out on top. Among them, a man dressed all in black wended here and there, trying to catch the attention of the practicing knight. Most told him where to go, but 1 or 2 stopped to listen. He made no exception for Jon. "Sir, may I interest you in the Night's Watch?" he said, jumping into his path. 3 square meals a day and a lifetime of adventure and valor in the northern plains, guaranteed. Jon tried not to laugh. "Give it another 18 years or so, and I might just take you up on that." As Jon passed him, the wandering crow jogged alongside him, refusing to give up. "But why wait? You're in the bloom of your youth, full of valor and courage. That I can see. Castle Black is crying out for strapping young lads like you." "Sir, if only you knew," Jon thought to himself. "Thank you for the kind offer, and do give my regards to Master Aemon, Squire Dalbridge, and Lord Commander Corvile." Though, the fact that he knew 3 of the most prominent watchmen took the wandering crow aback. It was not Yoren, though. This was someone else entirely, with clean teeth and a sense of humor. You have friends at the wall already, sir?" he asked, askance. "Tell me now, what are you waiting for? Just think how pleased they'll be to see you join their illustrious brotherhood. An illustrious brotherhood that'll stab you in the back and the front the moment you try to change their established order." Jon tried not to be bitter about it, but he found himself suddenly losing patience and pushing past the wandering crow, giving him a hard shoulder. He had enjoyed the irony, but now it grew painful to remember those men. As he picked up his pace and the crow got the message, his voice trailed after Jon like a heartbroken lover. "Just think on Aesir. You'll be an asset, I tell you." Jon scowled and looked back over his shoulder. "I am not a knight." It was long past high noon by the time he made it to the Godswood. 20 acres of walled woodlands greeted him, and dragging the cart along the dirt track was so arduous it made the muscles in his arms ache. Mercifully, all he had to do was follow a wide and pleasant stream to where the weirwood stood barely 4 acres in, hot and sweating as well as completely out of breath. He sat for a moment, just recovering his strength. As he did, he regarded the weirwood. It had the most spiteful, malevolent-looking face he had ever seen. Its red eyes seemed to flare, and its mouth was downturned, angry-looking. After washing his face in the stream, he followed Benjen's instructions and unloaded the armor at the base of the angry weirwood. There wasn't that much, now that he looked again at it, and it was the shield with the laughing tree that really caught the eye. Neatly piled up, he covered it up with the rough-spun sacking cloth from the forge to hide it from view. Benjen did say no one would come to collect it until late at night, which meant that he could take another moment to relax and catch his breath. "Jon." Bran's voice startled him. "Jon, we were meant to meet here last night." Jon whipped around to where Bran himself stepped out from behind the weirwood. Bran, in person and on his feet again. The sight took his breath away. "That was just a dream," he protested. "You were the dream. You showed me Summerhall, but it was all a dream." "No," Bran corrected him as he picked his way across the gnarled tree roots. "It was a message I sent you through the tree. Touch me now, and you'll see I'm real." Bran extended a hand towards him, and tentatively, Jon met it with his own. Bran was solid and real and warm. Without a second's thought, Jon pulled him into a tight hug and held him there until he feared his brother might suffocate. Even then, letting go was a wrench. "Jon, do you remember what I told you last time?" he asked. "They can see you, but they can't see me. If anyone had come along, they would have seen you hugging the air." Despite that, Jon thought it was funny. "But there's no one here now, so we can talk." The pair of them sat beneath the boughs of the weirwood, listening to the stream babble past. Although silent, Jon had more questions than there was time to ask them. But he started with the most obvious. "Where are you? We were told Theon Greyjoy killed you, and reckon. Then killed 2 innocent boys and passed them off as us," he explained. "Now Ramsay Bolton has Winterfell and Theon. I've seen him, Jon. He's gone half mad with torture." "Yes, well, it's no more than he deserves," Jon cut in. "Do we have to talk about him and Ramsay Bolton?" Bran looked cowed. "Yes, Jon, I want to hear about you. Where are you?" "I'm safe," he assured him. I'm north of the wall, but I'm safe. The three-eyed raven teaches me many things, and I can see the past. Reed is with me, and I've met the children of the forest. Some still live in the lands of the north. Jon, they all agree. And so do I, that you're here for a purpose, but for now you must change nothing. Not until we can decipher what you're doing and what your task is. Jon thought that was obvious. I'm here with our family right before the rebellion. My task is to stop Lyanna's abduction, prevent the war, and save all those people. Don't you see? Jon, no. Bran was unmoved. There will be consequences. Like what? He challenged, becoming frustrated. Rhaegar becomes king, Lyanna stays alive, Robert is only ever Lord of Storm's End, so father is never hand. Jon, listen to me! Bran cut over him again. There was a glimmer of fear in his blue eyes. There are other consequences. Uncle Brandon lives and marries my mother, so Robb, Sansa, Arya, me and Rickon are never born. Father never meets your mother, so you are unmaking yourself. Father marries another woman and makes other children, but not us. Winterfell passes to Brandon, and whoever his issue is, do you understand? You cannot make changes like this. Jon backed down, feeling his spirits sag. So I've been sent here to watch my loved ones die all over again. I cannot accept that, Bran. Finally, a glimmer of understanding. Even so, Bran stood his ground. I know it's hard, but there is something here, or someone, that you need. Something you will need to see or learn. I'm trying my best to work out what it is, and the others are all helping. Even Hodor tries to help. Jon's unhappiness lifted at the mention of the old gentle giant. Hodor's with you. Bran smiled and nodded. He's safe. He seems happy enough. Where we are, I think Sansa has arrived at Castle Black, Bran, said Jon. When I fall asleep, it's like I fall back into my other body and I can hear the people around me. Last night I heard Sansa's voice. She's escaped Ramsay Bolton. Is there any way you can reach her? Send her a message? What about Arya? Bran's expression turned sad again. If I knew where Arya was, then I could try. But she's so far out in the world I wouldn't know where to begin. Jon, I only found you by accident. That was one hell of an accident, he thought to himself. No, it felt far too designed for his liking. Bran continued, I will search Castle Black for Sansa. I've already used Mormont's old raven to look for you. I'll do the same for her. I'll find a way to get a message to her. I promise. Jon shrugged. Can't you do what you did for me? Meet her in a dream and tell her. It's not as simple as that, Bran replied, regretfully. I was able to do it for you because we're both on another... He trailed off as he struggled to find the right word. Plain, perhaps, but don't worry, I'll send Summer if need be. But how? He tried to ask, but the sound of approaching footsteps caught them both off guard. I have to go, Bran said. Look, if you need me, go to a weirwood tree, hold one of the deepest roots, and just say my name. I will hear you. They both got back to their feet, Jon helping Bran up the bank and back to the tree. Before they parted, Jon turned his brother back around to face him. I missed you, Bran. He tried and failed to not get choked up. I missed you too, brother, Bran replied. A ghost of a smile played at his lips as he returned from whence he came. Jon didn't see how. Bran just went as easily as he arrived. But he left more questions than he did answers. Bran's warnings echoed in Jon's mind at regular intervals. Every step he took, every greeting to every passing stranger, made him think back on what was said. Surely, he thought, everything he did was changing something. At the real tourney of Harrenhal, Rhaegar Targaryen did not speak to him. Ashera Dayne did not try to talk with him. His family did not rescue him from a mountainside, and so on and so forth. These were all changes to the sequence of events his being there introduced. Or maybe he was just splitting hairs and it was the major events he could not change. Thinking about it too much was beginning to make his head hurt. So he took himself off to the Flowstone yard to watch the knights prepare for the melee and the jousts. They began in the morning and he had half a mind to cast caution to the wind and have a go himself. He soon found the celebratory atmosphere painfully at odds with his darkening mood. Crowds of brightly dressed young maids lined the spectators' stands, many of them looking at him as if he should have been on the other side of the crash barriers. Attention he soon found uncomfortable, as though he were an insect beneath a looking glass. He felt himself magnified, scrutinized, and pushed farther out of place. Only the sight of Lyanna, shouldering her way through the crowds and beaming brightly at him, brought him back to himself. Gods, Jon, I've been looking everywhere for you, she called out, waving to him. Starting towards her, he picked up his pace and apologized to the giggling girls he inadvertently plowed through the middle of. Having spent the last few years surrounded by men in black, hordes of women in yellows, pinks, blues, and reds made him feel like he was walking through an explosion in a dye shop. A sensory overload left him disorientated. When Lyanna reached him, she grasped his arm as if afraid he would wander off again. You won't believe what's happened. We've only been invited to a private dinner with the Crown Prince. You as well, by the way. Despite the relief of being reunited with her, Jon felt himself grow tense again. Why? Are your brothers going as well? Does Lord Robert know? Robert won't be there, but my brothers will all be present as well as you, she replied, testily. Sensing his peculiar mood, she let go of his arm and the smile faded from her face as she added, The look on your face is awfully reminiscent of my father. What's wrong with you? I don't want you there if you're just going to glower at everyone in a very disapproving manner. Jon cast a furtive glance around, quickly deciding he could not talk properly, surrounded by these crowds. So he led Lyanna away towards a quieter part of the stands before deciding to get out of the flowstone yard altogether. She followed him in high dudgeon, occasionally repeating her last question until he found a quiet alcove set in the wall of the inner keep. Once there, he had himself fighting the familiar urge to tell her everything. He kept his tone even as explained himself. I just want you to be careful around Rhaegar Targaryen. That's all. Men like him, they think they can just use people and then discard them without any consequences. Lyanna calmed as well, but her brow was still creased into a frown. He seems to like you. He said you were polite and conscientious, which is why you're also invited to this gathering. How well do you two actually know each other? Jon heaved an exasperated sigh. I've spoken to him once for all of half a minute, and even that was less than 2 hours ago. And yet you know him to be a user and abuser of vulnerable young noblewomen, she replied pointedly. It looks to me like one of you is making uninformed judgments, and it's certainly not Prince Rhaegar. Realizing he was only serving to make himself look like an old fusspot, Jon backed down dejectedly. Worse still, he had no idea of when the abduction and rape was going to happen. Rhaegar could even have raped her after this gathering, and his father would never have gone into such details. Instead, he had to watch and read the signs, second-guessing the moves of total strangers. Still, he could not deny that the Crown Prince seemed nice enough, as if rapists openly display what they are. When I spoke with the prince, he seemed very pleasant, he replied. Truthfully, it's just that there's things I've heard about him, from others who know him far better than I ever will. She shook her head. It sounds to me like you ought to come along and form your own opinions, instead of listening to silly rumors and hearsay. Urging him on with an encouraging nudge to the ribs, she added, Come on now, stop fretting and join in the fun. He felt more than a pang of guilt for bringing her down. It was something he had always done, even when he was a child, he realized. Always withdrawn, always sullen, when his brothers and sisters wanted to play and he would sulk in the corner. I'm sorry, he said, forcing himself to smile. Don't be sorry, she replied, kissing his cheek. Just cast off this burden you seem to carry and enjoy yourself. With that, she spun away in a swirl of blue silk skirts, looking back laughing to make sure he was following her. Through the busy precincts within the walls of the vast keep, they browsed the stalls and sampled the wines and foods brought in from all over the known world. There were spices neither of them had seen before, strange meats from animals neither of them knew the look of, and wines so sweet they made him gag. Everything they saw and sampled merged and perfumed the air around them. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced before. If he could, he would have bottled it and kept it forever. They bumped in Brandon talking to a young Catelyn Tully, who looked at Jon and smiled and curtsied as if he were some kind of lord. His laughter could have been mistaken for rudeness, but he did not care. Leaving the young lovers to it, they carried on making their own sweet memories. Only once did he look back over his shoulder to his childhood nemesis. It felt strange to see her as his father and Brandon did. A young and beautiful girl dreaming of her future. Time swept them up, seeming to pass in leaps and sprints before the sun began to set and their carefree meanderings began directing them back indoors. Somehow, Lyanna ended up with a chain of large daisies draped through her hair, the brilliant white petals tucked beneath strands of her lustrous chestnut hair and another snug behind her ear. She twirled her skirts in a wide circle as she danced to a troupe of musicians playing a rowdy rendition of the Maiden of the Tree. Jon stood back from the crowd, framing her in his mind's eye and committing every detail to memory. That was his Aunt Lyanna, dancing and laughing with a daisy chain in her hair. That was how he would remember her, if ever he managed to make it back to his own time. When he made it back to his own chambers, he didn't have long to wash and change. Brandon had procured for him a set of evening clothes that just about fit, and as soon as he was in them, he was being ushered out of the door again. Expecting to be directed back to the Hall of 100 Hearths again, he got a surprise when they were in fact brought straight to the royal apartments in the Tower of Dread. Despite its name, the tower was among the largest of the 5 and most lavishly furnished, but the name suited Jon's mood as his nerves prickled at the thought of dining with the royal family. When Robert visited Winterfell, he had been a bastard consigned to the lower tables. Now he was among the true-born nobles in view of the king, queen, and all their princely offspring. "Should I kneel if they speak to me?" he asked Lyanna nervously. "Only if and when you're formally introduced," she replied. "After that, you'll be all right, but always address them as your grace. That's all you need to remember, but try and avoid to the king at all times. He is unpredictable. The word you're looking for, sister, is mad. The king is mad." In a brash display of the wolf blood, Brandon cut over her much too loudly for comfort. Lyanna turned to her brother with a stony look in her eye. "You'll find it hard to pleasure your harem without a tongue in your head, brother." Brandon smirked and let out a high whistle, showing his disdain. "I won't be the one to spoil your innocence, sister, but there are other, far more important ways of pleasuring a lady." "Oh, you're disgusting!" Augmenting her point with a sharp punch to Brandon's side, she pulled a face and added, "And if father knew half of what Barbary Dustin tells me, he'd tear that off and shove it down your tongueless throat." Although the punch clearly hurt, Brandon was laughing all the same. "Now, arrange your face. Here comes your new fancy man." Lyanna's face flushed bright red as Rhaegar Targaryen appeared through a doorway, prompting Brandon's further teasing. "Hasn't she told you?" he asked, turning to Jon. "She's all over our crown prince, only mentioning his name every 5 minutes." Jon said nothing as a feeling of deep unease got a hold of him. It was like watching two friends fight and being asked to take sides, so he kept an awkward silence. Lyanna, meanwhile, solidified into a silent, seething anger. Mercifully, Brandon's attention was caught by the arrival of Catelyn Tully, who had her arm linked through that, her father's. Behind her, a woman who could only be her sister, looking red-eyed and withdrawn, kept her distance. "Don't let him spoil your evening," he said to her. "Like you said to me earlier." Lyanna huffed indignantly, but soon simmered down. "I know he's only teasing, but sometimes he goes too far." Contrary to his earlier nerves, their being ushered inside brought with it relief for Jon. It dispelled the tension that had accumulated from Brandon's teasing and gave them something else to talk about. The high table, where Queen Rhaella and King Aerys were already seated, was up on a dais, where they could see over everyone. Princess Iakla and Prince Rhaegar soon joined them, and once more, Jon noted the perfunctory gestures that passed between them. They looked like old friends rather than a married couple, but no one else commented on it, and Jon soon turned away. When the food was brought out and sent down, Jon helped himself to the capons and fresh-baked bread. He offered to pour Lyanna's wine, but she covered the glass with her hands. "There's nothing worse than attending jousts with a sore head," she said, explaining her sudden desire to abstain. "All that crashing of wood and crumpling of steel plate when you've a hangover is never conducive to a good day out." Thinking that she may well have a point, he poured himself a glass and swore that would be his only one. As he ate, he found himself thinking of Benjen again. The boy was sat at Lyanna's other side, showing not a trace of nerves about tomorrow's events. "Someone I know is running in the lists in the morning," he told Lyanna, without mentioning Ben's name. "I'm worried because I think he'll be smashed into the middle of next week." Lyanna laughed. "Then it will be a lesson well served." "But it's serious," he insisted. "He could get himself killed. Anyway, I've decided to run against him in secret so I can at least try and safely knock him out of the saddle and put an end to this madness." For a long moment, she regarded him through narrowed eyes. "Are you sure that's a good idea, given your own injuries? Even so, there's no safe way of unhorsing a man in a joust. Whatever way you do it, it involves a big fall and a big crash. When you hit that ground, I say let your little friend learn the hard way. Sometimes, it's the best way." Somehow, he thought she would not be saying that if she knew it were Benjen, but before the subject could go any further, the meal was finished and the prince was addressing him from his place at the high table. Everyone in the room fell silent and turned to listen. Jon used the opportunity to memorize exactly who was there. Eddard was sitting nearby with Jon Arryn and the Tullys. The Danes and even a few Martells were also nearby. Every so often, his father cast a bashful look in Lady Ashera's direction, a gesture of utter hopelessness that pierced even his hardened heart. When he looked back at the high table, Rosier had produced a beautiful silver harp that glittered in the candlelight. Elia, clearly a fan of her husband's playing, leaned back in her seat so she could see him properly, a smile on her face. It was the first time Jon had seen her smile naturally. Even King Aerys seemed to soothe and stopped scraping at the table's surface with his hideous, uncut nails. Only Queen Rhaella remained tense as she sipped her wine and let her gaze dart all over the room. Once the music began, it was clear to see why the atmosphere changed so suddenly, and Jon had never heard anything like it in his life. No matter how much he wanted to loathe the prince, there was no other way to describe his musicianship besides extraordinary. And the guests did not listen just to be polite, they listened because it was beautiful. Within a few minutes, Jon let go of all his worries and troubles without having to make any effort at all. He sat back, helping himself to a forbidden second glass of wine, and just listened to the music. He couldn't name many of the songs, but there was one or two he recognized and thought they sounded wonderful when rearranged for the high harp. But even song he played was sad, so very sad that he became distracted as Lyanna sniffed and discreetly dabbed at her eyes with a silk napkin. Benjen noticed too, and turned to look at her, barely able to contain his laughter. God's Brandon spoke it true. You're actually in love with him. Realizing she would still be prickling from Brandon's teasing earlier, Jon tried to shoot his uncle a warning look, but Benjen either missed it or ignored it, and continued his teasing. Mercifully, chatter had broken out, and the music continued to play, so no one overheard what was being said at the Stark's table. I can't believe you're sniffling over this mushy prince's mushy music, sister. So much for the wolf blood. Give it a rest, Benjen, Jon tried to say, but the words seemed to vanish in a haze of tense silence. Lightning quick, Lyanna had grabbed a full jug of wine and upended it right over Benjen's head. No amount of quiet talk or music could cover the gasp of shock from Benjen, closely followed by the shrill curse. A stunned silence crashed through proceedings, and suddenly all eyes in the room were upon them. Mortally embarrassed, Lyanna shook as she looked from Benjen to the high table, as if trying to think of something to say to explain all this. Her words failed her, and she ran out of the room, covering her face with her hands. Rhaegar was on his feet, watching the place where Lyanna vanished through the door. Concern etched in his face. Is Lady Stark unwell? Jon met his gaze. I'll go after her, your grace. And so he did. He ran from the room, just as she had, and found her sat on a bench in the outer gallery, sobbing noisily. Together they had had such a wonderful day. It pained him to see her end it this way, cautiously, not entirely sure what to do. He sat beside her on the bench and hugged her. She responded by resting her face against his shoulder, slowly composing herself. I'm sorry, she sniffed. I'm sorry, I've ruined it for everyone and wrecked the prince's performance. Jon was about to answer when another voice cut over his own. Oh, you haven't quite the contrary, in fact. It was one of my own compositions, and I just told everyone that a girl was actually meant to get upset and douse her brother in wine as part of the performance. Everyone loved it. They both looked up to see Rhaegar standing in the opening of the gallery, looking slightly bemused, but not in the least upset. After a second, they both laughed, and Lyanna was finally able to dry her tears. The prince extended a hand to her. Come back inside with me and receive your applause, Lady Stark. You're a fine actress. I think I might have ruined it by thinking it was real and chasing you outside, Jon ceded, taking up the thread. I think I'll retire early. His Grace will take care of you. Thank you, both of you, Lyanna said, still flushed in the face. Especially your Grace. Thank you. It was nothing, he assured her. Looking to Jon, he added, Are you sure you won't join us? Whether he joined them or not, it seemed Lyanna was all smiles again. I think not, your Grace. Please look after my lady. I think she's quite capable of looking after herself, Rhaegar retorted, smiling all the same. But I will, I promise. He would not hurt her in front of anyone. In fact, he didn't seem the type to hurt anyone, really. Jon let them go, wondering what to make of it all. Sansa pretended she couldn't hear Brienne and Pod. Their voices were a distant buzz sounding from outside, worried and speculating about her frame of mind. She's been in there all day, won't leave his side, already been told there's no hope. But there was hope. Jon's heart still beat, and while he still breathed, there was hope. So she stayed, and she prayed, and she smoothed his brow and talked to him about their time in Winterfell, growing up as children. Maybe he needed to remember the good times. Maybe he needed a gentle reminder that there was once more to life than the Night's Watch. She didn't know the answer, but she was willing to sit there talking until the cows came home, if that was what it took. Just as she never left Jon, Brienne never left her. So Sansa made no protest, even when she knew she was being talked about. Besides, it was only to Pod who never spoke to anyone else. He was too shy, too nervous. When Brienne did return to Jon's chambers, she took up her customary position at the other side of Jon's bed, as though she were now guarding both of them. Oathkeeper was drawn, the Valyrian steel blade drinking in the light of Melisandre's fires burning at Jon's head and feet. It reminded her ice, before she remembered that once it was ice. It sickened her to remember that part of the Stark's ancestral sword once belonged to Joffrey and Jaime Lannister. Jaime, at least, had conscience enough to hand Oathkeeper back. "When we were young, I was so awful to him," she said flatly. Brienne's broad face darkened with concern. "My lady, you were a little girl." Unwilling to listen to excuses, Sansa sharply reiterated her point. "I was awful to him. Children may be awful, but childhood is no excuse for it. Now I may never get to say how sorry I am." She had no more tears left to cry, so she tried to tell Brienne what it had been like back then. How awful she had been without ever really understanding why she was doing it. She was never openly mean to him like her mother had been. She had been icy and distant, constantly correcting awry by saying, "He's our half-brother. He was their brother. He was also their last hope." "When I was still little and stupid, Joffrey had me stripped and beaten in front of the whole court," she recalled, her voice growing distant. The recently buried past burrowed its way up again. "One of the men who hit me was James Slint, and I remember wishing a hero would ride through the doors on a snowy white destrier and chop his head off. But no one came, and I knew then that heroes didn't exist, and probably never had. But Lord Tyrion had James sent to the Night's Watch for some other disgraceful thing he'd done. I asked Dolores if James was still here, and, do you know what?" "What, my lady?" "Jon cut off his head for cowardice," she replied, managing to raise a ghost of a smile. "Perhaps you were wrong about heroes." Sansa shrugged. "Maybe I was wrong about needing to be saved." Once that revelation was out of the way, she fell back into silence. Sometimes, she noticed, he did move. His hand clenched or his jaw tightened. Signs that he was still in there, fighting his way out. Strangely, a few of the Night's Watch brothers had come in to lift his eyelids and check his eye color. She could have told them herself they were dark gray, almost black. She remembered well enough and thought they should too, seeing as they were around him every day. Still, they were dissatisfied with her answer and checked anyway. It struck her as passing odd, but let them get on with it. Just as she recalled the peculiar ritual, the raven from before hopped onto her shoulder. Carefully, she brushed him off, only for him to flap around her head and land on her other shoulder. Brienne watched him, mildly amused. "You've made a new friend," she remarked. "He talks, keeps on asking for corn," she pointed out. "Ed said he belonged to the last Lord Commander, but Jon kept him." She watched as the bird flapped over to the door, pecking against the wood. Relieved at the excuse to get up and stretch her legs a little, she got up to let him out. But once she opened the door, the bird stayed where he was. He looked up at her, as if studying her through those black, beady eyes, and cawed loudly. Taking flight, he flapped into the yard and landed in the show, where once more he looked at her. Sansa laughed. "I'm not following you." The bird cawed and shrieked her name. "Stark, Stark." The laughter faded as Sansa stepped out into the open. Meanwhile, the raven flew back to her and perched on her shoulder once more. "I have no corn," she assured him. "If I had, it would be yours." But he only took off again, flying as far as the wall itself and perching on the gatepost that stood before the tunnel entrance. Through that tunnel was a portcullis. Through that portcullis lay the real north, stretching all the way to the uncharted lands of always winter. Hesitantly, Sansa followed the bird all the way up to that portcullis, nodding a silent greeting to the watchman on guard. She went as far as she could before the cold iron lattice prevented her venturing any farther. Curious, she looked out over the open plains and dense woods before her. Only one woman had ever joined the Night's Watch, and she had been raped and murdered for her efforts. Otherwise, she wondered whether it was only her who had come from the south to look out over those barren lands that held such fear and mystery to them. "You don't want to be going out there, little lady," the guardsman remarked. Sansa whirled around to face him. I just wanted to see. Mind, that's as far as you go now, he added. Looking never hurt no one, but there's thing you wouldn't believe out there. She reassured him with a nod before turning back to the north, beyond the wall and into a world she never imagined seeing. Her companion, the raven, squeezed through the bars of the portcullis and spread his wings on the other side, taking to sudden flight and leaving her there. She tried to keep him in her sight, but the howling of a wolf caught her attention. It reminded her of Lady, when her own dire wolf had been at her side. She could see the beast on the horizon now, large and getting larger the nearer it came. It bounded toward her through the snows as fast as it could go. It moved with the silent grace of shadow made flesh. Dire wolf, she realized. Summer? She whispered, fixing the dire wolf. Her voice grew louder as she repeated his name. Summer? Jon held his arms out for the squire to fix his armor in place. If he looked through the door of the armory, he could see the tilt yard stretching out in front of him, the best part of a mile long. The stands on either side were packed, and he could hear the roar of the crowds from where he stood. It was enough to make his nerves twitch unpleasantly. It wasn't his lack of experience in the joust that unnerved him, just the thought of displaying his inexperience in front of so many people. While he was finalizing his armor, he saw the Mystery Knight ride out into the lists. His arrival was met with a surge of applause from the crowds. However, after the way Benjen had treated Lyanna the night before, Jon was tempted to send him flying regardless of his delicate age. First round's you against the Mystery Knight, then, is it? The squire asked, reaching for the helm. It is indeed, he confirmed, as the last piece of his armor was slipped over his head. He knew the helm was in place properly, when everything sounded oddly muffled, yet sonorous at the same time, but he soon forgot the odd effects once his mount was brought out. A destrier that actually belonged to Robert Baratheon. Once mounted, he wasted no time in following his opponent into the list. Through the slit in his visor, he could see him now in that horribly mismatched armor. On the shield, the weirwood tree laughed at him from the other side of the list. Taking up the lance handed to him by the squire, he couched it as commanded and brought his horse into position. Then everything passed in a blur. Someone shouted a countdown. A checkered flag fell, and suddenly his horse was charging down the list at full pelt. The list yard was so long he thought it would take ages to meet his opponent. But the Mystery Knight was on him within a minute. Barely in the nick of time, he remembered to drop his lance and aim square over the breastplate. The crash of the impact rang through his head, jarring every bone in his body. He saw nothing but stars as he reeled backwards, out of the saddle and rolled arse over heel through the sand. His horse ran on, dragging him along the ground for several seconds before he managed to disentangle himself from the reins. Breathless and aching all over, he lay there trying to get his wits back. The sound of running feet closed in on him, and he felt his helm being pulled off. Still dazed, he managed to sit and look back, to where the Mystery Knight soaked up the applause. The weirwood still laughing at him from the shield on his arm. He had every reason to be laughing now. "Jon! Are you all right?" The shock of hearing Benjen's voice made him snap round, hurting his neck in the process. The boy was kneeling at his side, with Eddard at his side. His future father helped him back to his feet, but it wasn't the shock of his fall that made him slow and cumbersome now. He looked to the Mystery Knight and then at Benjen again. "What?" he asked. "A picture of innocence. You didn't think it was me, did you?"